Good evening. This is the Waffle Zoning Board of Appeals. Tonight is Wednesday, March 16th. It is 7 p.m. First case we have tonight is case number 22-4, Thomas J. Powers, 140 Washington Street, special permit under section 5B13G of the Waffle zoning bylaws to allow a 3-story, 6-unit mixed-use residential development within the business zoning district. The legal notice said the application is for a special permit under section 5B13G of the Waffle zoning bylaws for a mixed-use residential development at Washington Street and Chestnut Street. This is map, assessors map and lot 20-32. Okay, with us tonight we have Associate Member Judy Conroy, Tim Hegler, regular member Jane Coffey, regular member Drew Delaney. I'm John Lee. Bob Fitzgerald, regular member Dave Anderson, regular member. We also have Associate Member Mark Major, and we have Stephen from the office, Pat DeShanes from Economic Development, and Town Council George Pucci. So what we're gonna do tonight is have an introduction of this project at what we all know as the Clock Tower in East Walpole. So, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Dan Merrican with Legacy Engineering here on behalf of the applicant. Tom Powers is here with us tonight. Yes, so we have submitted a special permit application for a mixed-use redevelopment of the Clock Tower site. I know we're all familiar with that property. I'm just gonna run through the proposal quickly and then field any questions that you may have, and then we'll be looking for a continuance so that we have a hearing scheduled with the planning board in a couple of weeks. And we'll be receiving comments from the town engineer at that point that we'll need to address. So, the site is 132, 136, 140 Washington Street. As you know, all that remains of the former structure is the clock tower. But here on the existing conditions plan, we show you what the building used to be like, which is this area here, including this, was the former structure. And it goes way back, Tom tells me it goes back to 1884. And the clock tower itself was built in 1894. So, in the existing condition there, there's a tunnel here. This used to be a rail line, goes underneath Washington Street. It is now a town sewer easement, because the town has a sewer interceptor in it. And over that tunnel is the remains of a patio, brick patio that's over there on a concrete slab, and then a portion of the old building floor, I guess. It's I-beams and wood floor structure still there over the tunnel. But the rest of the structure, as you know, was destroyed by a fire many years ago. There still remains a brick patio out front with some stairs, things like that. So just to give you some history, Hollingsworth and Bose got a plan approved to redevelop this site back in maybe the late 2000s, and they never proceeded with it. My father got this plan approved in 2013 to build a same thing, a mixed-use plan around the existing clock tower. For various reasons, that didn't go forward. So here we are again, third time's the charm, hopefully. But that original proposal that was approved in 2013 was very similar, slightly larger building, more parking spaces. Site costs here are a challenge. There's a lot of topography. So our project's a little bit smaller. Fewer parking areas, fewer routine built. What we're looking to do is to build a 3-story structure around the clock tower. So the clock tower itself will not be a used part of the structure. At some point in the past, somebody made a lot of structural improvements in there so that clock tower can still be standing today. So it's kind of a structure on its own. The applicant basically prepares to build a structure around it, and the interior of the clock tower will really be used as living space. It's just going to be preserved as part of the structure. So as with mixed-use projects, the first floor would be commercial, and then the upper 2 floors would be 6 residential units. 5 of them will be 2-bedroom, 1 of them will be 1-bedroom. That would be the unit that has the clock tower embedded into it. That will only be a 1-bedroom. As we did in 2013, we're proposing a one-way in off of Chestnut. We all know this intersection can be challenging to pick up the remains of the the railroad embankment here, there are granite block walls here, and up here. So back in 2013, it was decided the best way to do it, and we still agree, is to have a one-way in off of Chestnut, and then coming in off of Washington, a two-way in and out. So that basically be the primary driveway, and this is in the same location as it was approved previously. We have 19 parking spaces laid out, which is what the bylaw requires. We received some comments at the department head meeting. We're gonna try to find a few more parking spaces. I think we can find a couple more parking spaces on the site. There's also, we're engaging in discussion with the town engineer about how to work on this. Basically, originally, there were perpendicular parking spaces. They backed out perpendicularly into Chestnut Street, which is not great. In 2013, the proposal was to convert those perpendicular spaces to angled spaces, still having cars backing out into Chestnut Street. We would do that if the town wanted us to, but our proposal is to basically try to keep our parking on site. What we're talking to the town engineer about is how best to handle this intersection. Since the building burned down, it kind of functions like a dedicated left and a dedicated right, but it was never really intended to be that. I think the town engineer's preference is to bring this back to a single lane, but it's something that we're exploring, and we might put a couple of parallel parking spaces here, very similar to what we have across the street. It's kind of at the outer fringe of the East Walpole downtown area, so there's a lot of parallel parking spaces around there. The other thing that we're talking to the town engineer about is that the street layout is very awkward here. Comes along like this, angles back hard, and comes through. We're talking about maybe whether we would realign that and do some type of property donation to the town or a swap or something like that to kind of come up with a layout that's more uniform for the road and to make sure that the sidewalk is part of the town property and not private property, those kinds of things. So those are still being explored, and I'll be working with the town engineer on that. Utilities are pretty straightforward. We have water and sewer off of Washington Street. We're doing an underground stormwater infiltration system. We have light poles proposed along the main driveway and a couple of light poles in our parking area. We don't, this is Hollingsworth and Bose. There's nothing over there. This is Sharon Crescent Credit Union down there. So it's pretty isolated in terms of neighbors and neighbors. There's not a lot going on there. The railroad embankment, as you know, here is pretty steep. It's 18 feet higher than our grade here, so it kind of creates a buffer, if you will, for the project. There are residences further down here. This is commercial, but further down here there are residential homes on Union Street. So that's the highlights and the overview. I saw Patrick's comments. We will address those in writing. I haven't received any other comments from any other town boards yet, aside from the discussions we had at the department head meeting. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this.
Okay, board members, you have questions? Go ahead, Dave.
Is this the plan that was approved prior?
No, so
This is what you're proposing now?
no, that's a kind of a basic rendering. The applicant actually has an architect working on a more detailed rendering. So what's different about what that rendering shows is we're gonna be adding more architectural interest off the Washington Street end. So probably be a storefront there, the first floor commercial uses, and some architectural interest on the sidewall of the residential units above, just so that can kind of tie in better with the area.
So, the only reason I ask is it looks like this was dated 12/2/15. So this is some sort of old plan?
No, that's the plan that the applicant was talking to a modular company about providing the upper two floors.
Yep.
We would stick-built the first floor and maybe have modular come in for the upper two floors. So that is a plan that they put together.
Okay.
I don't know if maybe the date is,
Yeah.
maybe they had done something for the prior owner.
And I had only brought
the
that up
current
because you
owner?
had said there was multiple approvals
Could
over
be.
the course of time.
No,
and then
that's
when
for the applicant. I don't
Okay,
know
this
what-
is the current project being proposed today.
Yeah, and we're gonna, I guess, as I say, we're gonna provide a more detailed architectural elevation on
Yep.
that, hopefully for your next meeting. And the intent is to preserve the clock tower structure as it is today. You know, the repairs will be needed, but, you know, it has a lot of interesting architectural detail, particularly in the upper portions that will all stay.
Is it subject to any sort of historic regulation or protection?
I don't think so. I mean, demolition of it would be, but no demolition is proposed. So Tom's kind of, he's really deeply interested in the history of the structure, so, I mean, we may go talk to the historical commission about it. He's talking about maybe trying to create some kind of plaque. Tells me it was a post office and it was, silent movie theater. First church in East Walpole. It's kind of the history of the structure is pretty fascinating.
You talked about parking on Chestnut Street. Right now, you mentioned that there's parking there, and you said that you consider, you know, angle parking, but is that something you can consider? Because it looks like that's all in the way your plan's laid out, that's all in the town right-of-way, so.
It is. It's something that the select board will have to approve as the roadway commissioners. I mean, we're certainly amenable to doing perpendicular parking or angle parking there, but.
But it's not your property where the.
No, it's something that the select board will have to approve. So we're trying to formulate
Because
what
as
the
I-
town engineer thinks is best, and then we would go see the select board about it.
So as I look at the plan, I'm trying, do you, we see a walkway, like a curved walkway, I'm looking at C3 here. Is that curved walkway on your part of the site,
No. Well,
That's-
some of it is. You can see
Yeah,
the property line here?
yeah, you've got a triangle sitting there, this weird triangle.
That's the way the property line is.
Right, but,
So,
so,
we're talking about, you'll see on my plan, I identified this triangle as being something that we would give to the town. The town engineer and I are exploring whether we would just come up with a new property line here that kind of fits the shape of the road better, and then if that would involve the applicant giving the town land, he would do that. If that would involve swapping land, that would end up ultimately having to go to town meeting, but, you know, whatever the town thinks is best for straightening out this weird layout, we're amenable to do.
but right now, there is no parking on the, you're not showing any parking on the front. And-
Well, it hasn't been painted in, no, in our proposed plan, no.
Right, there's none there,
Correct.
okay. So-
We're talking about maybe putting 2 parallel spaces in here, and then bringing this back to a single lane, and then bringing this sidewalk, because the sidewalk is on private property, so bringing the sidewalk out. And then that would handicap 2 parallel spaces.
Yeah.
That's something that Carl and I are exploring.
Okay. Because one of the, for site plan, we're looking at safety of it, and we might just say, well, no parking on Chestnut Street, because right now, as it's shown here, that's a right turning lane where
Well,
you're saying would be possible
We're
parking.
actually proposing to paint that. It's not painted like that. It's really not painted at all. So our initial proposal was to paint it as a dedicated left and a dedicated right, because that's how it functions now. But the town engineer is not sure that's the best idea.
Okay.
So we're working with them, and whatever they think is most appropriate for the intersection, we're willing to do.
So I'm also seeing that you've got some landscaping, which looks very nice, but it's on town property.
Correct. Has to be approved by the select board. And that could be,
Well,
it
the
could
whole
be
plan has.
concrete, it could be grass, you know, if the town doesn't want plants, that's fine.
Okay.
That was kind of the main focus of the department head meeting, was talking about Chestnut Street and that parking and the fact that we need to get consensus with the engineering department so that we can go talk about it with the select board.
So also, so the current proposal, just, so I have my bearings, 3 office spaces on the first floor,
Yeah, it's not gonna be a restaurant, we're not designing for a restaurant, so,
6 bi-level units,
correct. 2 floors.
One being a one-bed.
2
5 being
floors
a
for
two-bed.
each unit.
Yep, yeah, so 6 bi-level units, 5 two-beds, 1 one-bed because of the clock tower.
Correct.
We also see dormers on the top on the, what looks like the 4th level. What is
That's just attic space.
Just attic space.
attic space?
That's for what's. I've got a drawing over here, if anybody wants to see it.
That's nice looking.
Got a 10th grader from Canton High School do it for me.
That's nice.
Yeah, you know, nice. Wonderful. I'm gonna keep everything, restore everything nice. That's right there.
Thanks.
You mentioned that you may find a few more parking spaces. Are those the ones you're talking about on Chestnut, or are you talking about in the
No.
green space?
Well, I'm looking at maybe trying to relocate this dumpster and maybe getting 1 or 2 in there, and then possibility of maybe getting 1 in here. There's a discussion I'm having with Carl right now about not having this walkway be here and, basically pulling the sidewalk out into the layout entirely so that it's on town property, which is kind of the way it should be. And then that would mean this would go away for the most part, and then, there would be an opportunity to maybe put another parking space in there. So I might be able to find 2 or 3 more spaces.
And the landscaping, the area shown in green is just a sort of mixed
So
planting.
this is the tunnel, right? So there's a wall here, probably 15 feet tall. There's a wall here, and this is an old railroad layout. So the town sewer is in there, so that's just gonna stay entirely as
As is,
is. And then this is the railroad embankment for the old railroad line up here, so that's
Nice.
basically gonna stay
Okay.
wooded.
As is, okay.
You mentioned that the entrance and egress of the property was from the original set of plans. The reason that you kept that, is that because of the design of the building, or is that because of traffic study or anything like that, I guess?
This entrance here, I provided for circulation, because I know the fire department likes to have nice circulation through the site. So we obviously don't necessarily need this entrance, but I think it adds value to the site to have an entrance here, just for a circulation standpoint. It's very similar to what was done in 2013. There was an entrance driveway there next to all the active parking on Chestnut Street.
Do you know if in 2013 there was a traffic study done for the area?
There was a study done that assessed site distances for our driveways that are the same here, and I can provide that.
Okay.
And on the Washington Street entrance and exit, have you looked at having that just as an exit? Where you'd enter from Chestnut Street and exit at Washington Street?
I haven't looked at that. I'm not opposed to that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I met with Kyle last night. I had some concerns. I'd like to see as much of the pedestrian traffic be in the town layout, and you just indicated you also would like to do that along the front of the building. I had some concerns the way it's drawn, that you're asking someone walking under the, quote, bridge to take a sharp right and enter the private property to a crosswalk and then proceed to Washington Street. Human nature is they're not gonna walk to the crosswalk on the private property. They're gonna follow the pathway you outlined, going from point A to point B, yes.
Yeah, Carl and I already talked about.
Yep.
It would probably be a second crosswalk out here, but it depends on what we do here. There's an existing sidewalk that runs just
Yes.
like this
Yep.
and like this, and it's mostly on private property, only partially on public property.
So where I see one handicap space, and I'm sure that's all you need, but I'm looking at the entrances to or the accesses to the office areas. They're pretty far away from the one handicap space, so I would suggest, or maybe you could consider putting, 2 handicap spaces, if they fit, out front along Chestnut Street, because it's probably highly unlikely that you'd have the need for 3 handicap spaces all at one time, but it would keep that roadway somewhat open And, you know, I think it would just make a better site, keep the little village look that there's some space between this curb to the building.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, and the other thing, I believe they're gonna run a sidewalk down Union Street, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a grant or something
Yep,
that was
that's
given.
It's the other side of the street, though. It's closer to the Route 1 side.
Right, but what I'm getting to is, there are a lot of people that walk Union Street to that corner of Chestnut and Washington to take the bus. So, a lot of them right now, you know, while they're waiting, they're sitting on the curb, or they're leaning against something, or, you know, they're kind of almost in the roadway sometimes. But there are a lot of people that walk from that area out to Route 1 to go to work. So I was wondering if you could consider some kind of bus stop area, or kind of like, making sure that that curb is large enough for people to stand. There's sometimes 10 to 12 people standing on that corner.
And, yeah, so, I mean, it's all fenced off now, but we are gonna
Right.
rebuild the patio here.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was a question that came up in the department head meeting, even about a shelter of some kind, but I don't know that under zoning we can do a shelter structure. but
Right, right.
This will all be open patio.
Yep.
Right there, and the bus stop is right there.
Because as it's drawn now, it looks like that corner, I know you need a turning radius, the way you have the second lane in there for right turn. It just looks a little tight between the standing zone for the bus stop, because that's basically where it is.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is the existing,
Yep.
this is basically the existing curb layout and sidewalk layout on this corner.
Okay.
So, I think the way it's going is that this ends up coming out, and more of the sidewalk is built around the corner here.
Okay.
But, again, I gotta, you know, because we can't give this away to the town, because then we won't comply with our side yard setback.
Right. No, I'm not asking you to give away, but I'm
You
just
know,
like
so-
to make it a little more
So
amenable.
It probably will end up that this rounding slides out into the intersection more.
Okay.
And, you know, so there'll be more space there.
Okay. While we're talking, you mentioned the clock tower, and it doesn't have any historical, because you're not tearing it down and you want to restore it. There's a beautiful weathervane on the top. Anyway, do you have anything that says that that's structurally sound enough to build around?
So, Tom will provide that to the building department when he
Okay.
goes forward with the building permit application, but he tells me, I haven't been in the structure, but he tells me that they went in some years ago and really reinforced that whole structure, which is probably the only reason it's still standing.
Okay.
You know, 'cause it's pretty tall.
It is tall, 63 feet. That's
Yeah,
what you wrote on your
I
plan.
actually, we measured it back in 2013, I don't remember exactly.
72 feet high.
Oh, okay. I saw 63 somewhere. As far as building around the clock tower, and do you have any plans to have any particular fire suppression? Because it sounds to me like you're building around a tube. And so,
They'll have to work all that out
okay,
with the building department at the time. If this gets approved, that's when all that stuff gets ironed out. You know, that's detailed architectural stuff that Tom has not delved
Okay.
into yet.
and on the same lines, the attic space, whether it has a sprinkler that's wet or dry or whatever, that will come up with fire at a later point?
Yeah, when we go through the building department process, all that stuff gets discussed with
Okay.
the police, with the fire department and the building department.
Okay, thank you.
Just out of pure curiosity, you're literally proposing to build around that tower?
I mean, I don't know the details of that yet. I would imagine that the siding and all of that in the first 3 floors will come off, and it will be, you know, it'll just be basically boarded off from the other spaces interior to it. But, yeah, I mean, they're basically gonna stick build a structure around the existing tower, and they'll tie it all together structurally, whatever, you know, the structural engineer determines needs to happen there, but that's the basic concept.
Any other board members with questions or comments? Jane, you're our resident East Walpole person.
That's right. I'm just thinking, at the time, you said that somebody did something to reinforce it. There was scuttlebutt around years ago that somebody who owned Bristol Square Cafe or breakfast place, there was a woman who was going to open up a restaurant there. Remember that? So I think that may have been.
Yeah, there was scuttlebutt about that, and that's not that's not in the works for this, so.
These are designed as office space.
Yeah, they're designed for basically low-intensity uses.
Are there any neighbors or anybody that wants to comment or have a question about this proposed development?
There's just one other thing I wanted to mention.
Hold on,
As you
we have
come out, as you come out on oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
As you come out of Chestnut Street onto Washington Street, that's a horrendous corner right there. I mean horrendous. They come over, going to Washington Street, coming to South Norwood, and they're flying. And when you go out there, you can't always see until you're out there. Here they are.
Yeah, unfortunately, the granite, old bridge abutments there, right here, and equally unfortunately, the Sharon Crescent Credit Union's parking lot is like right on top of it, so I don't know. I mean, it's in the town layout, I don't know if the town could do something about that, but I looked at it, I don't know that you could easily do something about the site distance coming out of Chestnut there.
Because I'm just thinking out, people trying to exit, in and out on Washington Street, that's gonna be a real nightmare. Maybe they could put signs up, caution signs or speed bumps or something, because it really is dangerous there.
Well, our site distance is actually good, because we're further down, and we can see beyond, and around that. It's really just, and this is part of the discussion we're having with the engineering department is, it seems to be leaning that they would probably operate better as a single lane.
Yeah, right.
Instead of having two cars next to each other, one trying to go left and one trying to go right.
Yeah.
So
That
I
kinda
think it's
just
going in that direction.
Yeah, that kind of just evolved after the,
Yeah, as soon
Fire,
as people
people
stopped
just-
parking
right,
there,
right.
people just, made it a two-lane intersection when it was never intended to be.
that was a pretty busy little place up until time of the fire.
It was, yeah.
You had a bank and a pharmacy, Rocky's little store. lots
You
of
have a
things there.
question or comment in the back?
Yeah.
Come on, do you want to just come on up?
Thank you.
If you would
Rich
just-
Dunn, I'm a resident over Riverwalk Commons, 17 years, and I might be the expert traffic pattern there, because my house is the first one on the left. So if I'm having a cup of coffee in my kitchen, I can see the vehicles going by on a day-to-day basis. I'm all for, all for having progress and, additions to that area. I just would kind of suggest that a lot of thought go into the traffic patterns of the egressing of those vehicles onto Washington Street as well as onto Chestnut Street. There's a lot of traffic every day, a lot of gravel trucks go by back and forth all day, and you can have some residential participants there, living there. A little extra caution has to be put into those plans, I would think. Other than that, everything looks pretty nice, but I would suggest, maybe a brief study done on that right now. Especially now, the way things are, the traffic's back to the way it was before. It's pretty tough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, anybody else on comments on this? Okay, so you're gonna look at, Mr. O'Leary, good evening.
John O'Leary, Washington Street. Just a question to you, Mr. Chairman. Is it known, will it be one business on the first floor or multiple businesses at this time?
It depends on who comes looking. It's 3,500 square feet and change, so it could be a single tenant, it could be two.
I thought it was three offices.
It's just
Three.
kind of lined off that way, but obviously if you get a single tenant who wants to take the whole first floor, then they'll fit it out that way.
Right.
I don't think he intends to build it into three up front. He'll, put it on the market and see who comes looking.
But the point is that the first floor it's commercial. Let me ask you, what if there were four people that came saying they wanted small office, you could still do four, right?
You could, yeah.
Sorry, not to hyper focus on the clock tower, or on the tower, and I know it may seem that way. I just, so you said that there's no historical determination related to that? as far
Not that
as-
I'm aware of. The historical bylaw in town is a demo.
Yep, which is fair. My only thought with that is, if the intent is to preserve it because it's historical in nature, whether or not it actually has the determination or not, put over here,
Yep.
why not just take it down, build a better building, and then just add to the top? Like, why leave it and build around it? I don't understand that.
Well, we always were under the impression that people would want it preserved.
Yeah, 100%, but what you preserve on the 1, 2, 3, first 4 levels of it, no one is ever gonna see ever again anyway, right?
You're
So,
saying, try to save the top of it and put it on the building.
yeah, I just don't understand the thought process and
I don't know
not.
how easy that would be. I can, you know what, he's got an architect on board, we can explore that to see if that's an option. I just don't know how easy that would be to do, to save the top of it, because it has a lot of detail to it. To take it off and save it and then put it on the new building, that's an interesting
I
question.
was just thinking to comment on that for you, Dave. I mean, if that were the case, I would imagine you need to confirm that with the historical commission, if that falls into the guidelines of the historic demo as well. Even if it's a partial demo, I'm not sure.
And it's not
Have to look at that.
a historical record, is
Let
So I
me-
guess that's the answer to my question. It's
Yeah.
because any variation outside of building around it would require a potential historical investigation, we'll call it, to determine whether it was or wasn't, which would be subject to like a whole other set of
Right.
things. So that's, got it.
And I think it would be really hard to do what,
Well, and I
I know
don't.
it makes sense,
well,
but I
no,
think
it's
it would
not-
be hard to do.
It's not that I was proposing that you cut the top off, save it on the side, put it back on the top, but like you could do a very thoughtful
yeah.
rendition of exactly what was there in a new construction form that would have the same optics, I guess. But neither here nor there, I just was curious.
I mean, they may
why.
find when they get into the structural design that they, you know, Tom's initial thought is because the tower has been reinforced, there's cabling in there, that it needs to stay kind of untouched. But they may find when they get into structural design of the structure that they might be able to incorporate the lower parts of the tower structure into, you know, the usable space of the first 3 floors. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. So you've got more conversations with particularly the town engineer about traffic. If you would look at the idea of one way in, one way out. You said you're gonna try to find some more parking spots. I think a lot of this is just coming down to parking and flow of the area.
Yes.
And making sure that can be done safely. Do any other board members have, yeah?
I just had one more question. This kind of goes back to the twice the floor space of the downstairs, the residence.
Provide that
Is
calculation.
it somewhere in here? I didn't see it.
It's not, it will be submitted.
Okay.
Is there a concern with the bus stop potentially, blocking that entrance?
You know, it was noted, but I mean, you know, bus stops kind of interfere with
Yeah, I
traffic
mean-
wherever they are, you know, it's a temporary disruption, you know.
Right, I wouldn't see it being a huge flow issue, just
No.
more of a, that's usually
Even though
not.
how many times the
usually
bus
don't
stops
account
there.
for- Yeah, a bus stop usually doesn't go in front of the driveway.
Well, I think the bus will end up stopping here, right, because this will be where the stop is. So the bus will stop here, you know, the nose of the bus would be before our driveway.
I'm sure the bus uses that entire block as a stop right
Probably
now.
does,
Yep.
yeah.
Just, I guess, something else to think about.
Sorry, John, last thing,
Yep.
sorry. So, bus stop, right up front, so, I'm sorry that I don't already know the answer to this, is Washington Street a state road,
No,
town road?
town road.
Does the fact that there's a bus stop there require you to communicate with the MBTA and coordinate with them as it relates to what may or may not happen there?
Not that I'm aware of, but I could talk to Carl about that.
Okay. Might be something that probably should be looked into, right? It's a MBTA stop.
Check into it.
Just-
Yeah, that's a good point. I've actually seen where they've had to move bus stops
And
because of
it's-
that.
Right.
And it probably takes the coordination for that,
Yes.
so.
Relevant.
Okay. When do you want to continue this until?
Come on, please.
Okay, so, what do we have?
20th.
What's that?
20th of April.
20th of April? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
that'd be great.
So we'll continue this until April 20th, and, yeah. That's, yeah, if I'm not here, I'm not here.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Okay. Okay, next, we have a number of people here for Burns Ave, I believe. So,
Is there a vote to continue?
what's
Yeah,
that?
we need a vote.
Oh, yeah, we need a vote to continue, sorry. Could I have a motion to continue until April 20th?
So moved.
At the request of the applicant, so moves until April 20th, moved by Jane, at 7 PM at Town Hall. But second on that? Second by Drew. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, so carried. And voting on this, as of this point, will be the 5 regular members.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be recusing myself.
Okay. Okay. So next on the agenda is Burns Ave, and this is case number 20-21, Wall Street Development Corporation, 48 Burns Ave and Union Street, Brook Lane, on remand from the Housing Appeals Committee, request for project change, amendment to comprehensive permit under Mass General Laws 40B, to amend the project to include Brook Lane with 40 units in 8 buildings instead of the previously approved 32 units in 6 buildings, and utility connections from Brook Lane, and eliminate installation of utilities from Union Street. So, at our last meeting, you were going to get us an updated set of plans, and also, those were gonna go to Sean Reardon at Tetra Tech, where we would have Sean do the peer review, so. Good evening, Mr. Petrosi.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Lou Petrosi for Wall Street Development Corp. You are correct. At the last meeting, we agreed to present revised plans for the project to be consistent with what was previously approved under a superseding order of conditions by DEP, which required the elimination of 2 units. So the project reduced in size from 40 units down to 38. Those plans and other supplemental documents were provided to the zoning board as well as a copy to Tetra Tech. I understand that they have reviewed the plans and the other submittals and provided some comments to the board, but we didn't receive those until late yesterday afternoon, so we have no basic comments related to those, to the review prepared by Tetra Tech of these plans. I think the letter, from what I read quickly, most of the items were resolved to the satisfaction of the peer reviewer. So we're here to listen to the comments and discuss any other questions the board may have relative to the revisions that were made.
Okay.
That's pretty much.
So what we'll do tonight, Sean, we'll have you go through your memo, the issues you have, and I'd also add, Mr. Petrosi, we have, and I'm sure you've seen them, a letter March 9th from the Walpole Fire Department, which is 1.5 pages long, and from Town Engineer Carl Baldoff, a 2-page memo listing a number of items. Have you seen those letters?
We received them all at the same time, so we have seen them.
Okay. And you also have a 1-page memo from Patrick outlining some of the other issues on that. That's dated today. Have you seen that one?
That's from, yeah, that was today from the health director.
Oh, from the,
that
I'm
was
sorry,
a
Health
memo
Director.
from her.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, Health Director, not from you, Patrick. It's
No.
to you, it's to Patrick. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you're aware that those are other issues that need to be addressed. So Good evening, Mr. Reardon, how are you?
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Sean Reardon with Tetra Tech, Civil Engineering Review Consultant for the board. As you all mentioned, yep, last time we spoke, the big point of contention was just getting to a point where we were all sort of looking at a set of plans and a proposal that made sense with everything that happened to date. Great news is, got that set of plans, got that set of documentation, everything's sort of been rolled up and consistent now. There are a few little sort of minor tweaks in there that got sort of left behind that can be addressed easily going forward. So now we're really at a good starting point for our review. We're actually beyond a good starting point because most of the project had already been reviewed before, already been approved in large part by you guys. So, you know, we're pretty well on, and that's evidenced by the kind of comments that we had. The drainage design, really well developed, well done, meets all the standards. Traffic report covers most of the bases that we'd like to see. Pretty much, you know, there's some traditional recommendations for improvements, like a little bit more clarity on some of those. The biggest change is obviously the change from a one-way long cul-de-sac to an access from two different directions, which from our standpoints is always a good thing. I mean, it's better for normal traffic access because people have better options for getting to and from the site, usually the most efficient one, right? It's better for emergency access, better access for the fire department, better access for police department. It's also better for utilities. So, you know, now we can loop a water main through from Burns Avenue to all the way to Brook Lane. That gives everybody on Burns Avenue better service, everybody on Brook Lane better service. So really, really a good thing. We issued like Mr. Petrozzi said, most of our comments that were addressed in that first letter were addressed to our satisfaction. There's a couple hanging items. But with this new submittal, we sort of did a little bit deeper dive and generated more refined comments. Most of those comments are a bit like bookkeeping, just to make sure the record's clean, but some are more substantial. And I think what I like to do is just explore a couple of those. The first one is, when I looked at the plans, I was pretty surprised that the sidewalks on Burns Ave and Brook Lane don't connect through the site. So I think that's something that warrants some consideration. It's kind of awkward to you know, have these small cul-de-sac roads that have sidewalks on them that really go nowhere, and now we've connected through, but the sidewalks don't connect through. So we'd certainly like to see that explored a little bit. The good news is, yes, it's added impervious area, but I think the drainage design has been done robust enough that I wouldn't expect any subsequent changes to come to the drainage design as a result of that. So I think there's not a whole lot of complication to incorporating it. One challenge is going to be the driveways are pretty short. So when you add the sidewalk, you just want to make sure those driveways are long enough so that when there's a parked car in the driveway, the bumpers aren't hanging out over the sidewalk. So that might create a little shift in the building location. Traffic mitigation, a lot of good ideas proposed in the traffic report, but what we'd like is a little bit more specificity on what exactly is proposed and that those measures get shown on the plans. So if they propose a new sidewalk crossing or a new crosswalk or new handicap ramps, let's have that work shown on the plan so you guys can see it, make sure that there's adequate space to do it. I think as we just found out from the last project, sometimes the right-of-way can be pretty wonky, that maybe you don't have the space that you thought. So if there's going to be improvements that are part of the mitigation package, they should be on the plan so we can see where they are. The other thing we had is last time we talked about, now with this two-lane access, we have the ability to connect construction through Brook Lane rather than Burns Ave. From our perspective, it makes more sense to go via Brook Lane. I know that's going to be disappointing to the people on Brook Lane, but there's far fewer residences. It's a quicker connection to Union Street. So from our standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to connect through there. A possible sort of happy medium would be to have the morning traffic, the entering traffic use one road and the exiting traffic use the other. You'd still only need one stone construction entrance. So usually you have the construction entrance is filled with stone, is got a big stone entrance to take any crud that's on the wheels, get them off the wheels before it gets on the roadway. So if you were to use one for entrance and one for exit, you'd really only need the stone entrance for the exit. So we're still, it's not overly complicated to use it both ways. We're still waiting on a lighting plan. Not a huge item in my mind, but it's sort of necessary for the record. I don't expect a lot of anxiety about it, but it needs to be completed. Mr. Petrosi has noted that it's forthcoming. And then they provided a emergency access plan that shows, shows the path of the fire truck going through the site. It's great access, but it should be coordinated with the fire chief, make sure he's happy with it, make sure that it meets all his needs. And then the last thing, I remember last week, I could have got this wrong, there was some discussion about the size of the units getting slightly bigger. I sort of did an overlay of the old plan, the new plan, it didn't seem like the units had gotten bigger, so I just want a little bit of clarification on that. But all in all, a much better point than we were last time, and I think we're, with the exception of the sidewalk thing, I think most of the other things are pretty easy to address.
Okay, board members, any questions? I've got a question right off. The driveways into these units, we have a letter from one of the abutters who talks about the size of the driveways. Did you look at the size of the driveways to see, are they standard sized driveways into these units?
What we typically look for is if they're being counted as a parking space,
Okay.
that they meet the minimum parking dimensions of the town. And I think they're all at least 22 feet deep, so they would meet the minimum parking sizes. But they're not much bigger than that. So if we were to put a sidewalk, say a 4-foot sidewalk, a foot off the edge of road, they wouldn't meet that dimensional requirement anymore. But the ones as shown on the plan right now without a sidewalk look like they satisfy that.
Okay, so without a sidewalk, they meet it, but you just talked about, having sidewalks through this, so that's something that seems like, we know this is a densely developed site, but what we're seeing now is pushing the limits on the building, pushing the limits on the driveways, and now we'd be pushing the limits if there were sidewalks shown.
Yeah, there would have to be some shifting of structures to accommodate that sidewalk.
That seems like a big issue.
And you do plan on having Mr. Petrosi, you do plan on having sidewalks there? Okay. So, 38 units and nobody walking, they'll be walking in the roadway? Okay, well, I think you've identified that as an issue, not only sidewalks on the site, but how they tie into Brook Lane and Burns Ave. Okay.
Yes. Intuitively, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to not connect the two sidewalks.
Okay.
John,
Yes.
memory serves me, at one point, he did say, Mr. Petrosi did say there would be sidewalks. How did that get
Go.
lost in?
Right.
In fairness, there is a small section of sidewalk extending from Burns Ave onto the site, but it doesn't connect through.
Right.
So what are the requirements for a sidewalk?
Under 40B?
Well, just in general, like if we were doing a complete streets, like if it was 3 feet, 4 feet.
If this were a subdivision roadway?
Yeah.
You'd need at a minimum 1 4-foot sidewalk on that ran the length of the subdivision roadway. If not 2, I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, so Walpole, it is 2, and sometimes one of them gets waived, but
Okay.
it is 2.
One on each
Yeah.
side.
One on each side.
Okay. So
In my
8 feet.
opinion, it's almost, and I think you alluded to this, it's almost unsafe, right? Because you're saying, I'm gonna accommodate a walker coming off of Union Street onto Brook Lane. I'm gonna give them a way to get through to Burns Ave, right? But I'm gonna take them off the sidewalk, put them onto the street, and then back onto the sidewalk on Burns Ave. It would be very hard for me as a reviewer to go gently into that good night and not, I would caution you on authorizing it, but, that's certainly within your purview.
So, and when you said Brook Lane, I actually don't see, I guess there is a sidewalk on one side.
Yeah, if you're facing Brook Lane from Union Street, I think it's on the left side.
Okay. Yep, I see that. Okay, but that's your point, it does, the Brook Lane sidewalk doesn't tie into the development site because there is no sidewalks on the development site, except for that small one coming in off of, maybe.
Correct.
What about,
I mean, in fairness, it made a lot of sense when it was a long cul-de-sac, right? Because there's nowhere to get to. So you could treat the project as a standalone entity at the end of Burns Ave. But the minute you connect them through, you're creating a logical connection. And so anybody on Brook Lane that wants to get over to Burns Ave is certainly not gonna go out to Union Street and go down Pleasant Street, right? And you wanna give them a way to do that.
okay,
So would,
In addition to that issue, going back to the length of the driveway, and if you have to take 4 feet, I feel very, very strongly that we need that sidewalk there. It's narrow enough as it is, there's no parking. And as far as I'm concerned, there'll be parking there no matter how you slice it, because there's a lot of people living there with very little parking for visitors. So I think you need that. Now, when you make a reference to that have to be something accommodating, what would that look like? Moving the garage back 4 feet? Because I really feel very strongly about this. There needs to be a sidewalk. As it is, you don't want parking, and people are gonna be parking. No doubt about it. And so people wanna walk, they're gonna walk outside of where the car is, because the cars are gonna pull in just by habit, as close as they can to the grass. They're gonna be outside. To me, that is a roaring example of an accident waiting to happen.
So what we would expect is, at a minimum, one sidewalk extending through the site, right? So it would leave one side of the development unchanged. The other side that had the sidewalk, presumably the buildings would have to shift back to accommodate a lengthening of the driveway that would accommodate the sidewalk, so.
That's a pretty, that seems like a pretty big order. They're gonna have to quote-unquote shift. Development has to push the garage back, is that what you're saying?
Or the entire,
The entire building.
the entire
The
building.
entire building?
On the lot. And remember, it's probably 5 feet, so it's probably manageable. Admittedly, I didn't wanna
Yeah,
prefer one side over the other. I figured, once it was clear that the board was
yeah.
of a mind to require a sidewalk, then the applicant could go look at it and see what made sense from his standpoint.
See, I'm looking for something more solid than manageable. We often get in the reviews from the various departments, particularly the fire department, but it's okay, it's okay if XYZ is in place. It'll be okay if XYZ is in place. And it's a more manageable. Those are the things that I think slip through the cracks, and then we get into trouble.
Well, to your point, I wouldn't recommend we just say, well, give us a sidewalk. I would say,
Right.
give us a plan that shows a sidewalk that we can review to make sure that
Yes,
it works.
that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Petrosi, is there a hesitancy to being willing to provide a sidewalk through the site? Because, and that's my first part of my question. The second part of my question, in doing so, that 5 feet and shifting all of the buildings back, does that create an unaccounted for new violation in zoning that you would need relief for?
Violations.
Well, not violation, sorry.
We don't do violations.
Yeah, sorry, not violation.
But we're happy to look at the possibility of including a sidewalk. As Sean mentioned, it would require shifting of a few buildings back, but wasn't included in the original approval to have a sidewalk, so we didn't include it in this proposal. So it wasn't a change from the original approval that the board had granted, so we didn't introduce another change to the project, so. But we are, we have the ability, I think, the driveways are, some of them are more than 22 feet, or they could be 24 feet, but there's a combination of things that could be done to shift the buildings back a little bit, depending on which side is more feasible than the other. And we'll take a look at it, that's all I can say. Right now, we have a 24-foot roadway there, including the Cape Cod berm, so there is room to even squeeze a foot out of the out of the access drive and, you know, play both ends against the middle, so to speak, to accommodate that. Do you have a second question? Did you have?
Well, no, I mean, it's safe to assume that obviously in the original application, when it was a cul-de-sac, a dead-end road, safe to assume that not too many people would really need a sidewalk to walk down there unless you live there versus a through road that potentially could draw
I
more
don't know what,
pedestrian traffic.
I don't know what the thought process is at the time. I mean, it just wasn't included as a condition of the original approval.
I can tell you the thought process. The thought process clearly was, it was a cul-de-sac at a dead-end road. Okay, Mr. Petrosi, another question. Your original letter of eligibility from Mass Housing was for how many units?
36,
36, and now you're asking for 38?
right.
Okay. So, are you gonna go back to Mass Housing and ask for a new updated letter of eligibility?
I wasn't planning on it, but according to the regulations, increase of 10% or less of units that were previously approved is considered an insubstantial change under the regulations. We're here under a substantial change because we were increasing by 8 units. So now we're in that gray area of what, but I'm happy to run it by them. I'm sure, you know, we've done it in the past, so I can certainly do that. But under the regulations that are in place now, an increase of 10% or fewer units is considered an insubstantial change to the project, so.
But, you know, we're looking at the letter of eligibility that says 36, and now we're at 38, so.
Understood, but that's what the modification request is all about.
Okay.
One question for
Yep.
Mr. Reardon. On your report, the page number 5, number 34, is this your team's comment that you agree with the assertion the project's not likely to serve as a cut-through?
Yeah,
And where did you, I guess, where do you base that consensus from?
just on a sort of a risk-reward scenario, that there's really no tangible benefit to looping through the road, particularly when you think about the topography. So we don't see any sort of substantial incentive to taking that as a cut-through from
Yeah, I guess
making the
my
same
only,
movement.
just because I think the sidewalk's a valid point. If you have pedestrians living within the area, you certainly want to make sure that they're walking not on the roadway, but on a sidewalk. But I guess that statement kind of maybe doesn't help that point of there may be added traffic of people cutting through, or is that not even necessarily part of why you would necessarily want a sidewalk? It would be more just a,
Well, pedestrian travel and vehicle travel kind of sort of follow two different mindsets.
right,
I think as a pedestrian, there's a lot of ways I take a particular route as opposed to another one. As a driver, it's usually I want to get to point A to point B as quick as possible. In this case, it's if I wanted to get to the other side of Burns Avenue from Union Street, the quickest way to do so is to take a left on Pleasant Street and go that route. There are going to be people that obviously that are on Burns Lane if they're on Burns Ave if they're on Union Street. Yeah, they're gonna go up Brook Lane now, but to me that makes sense. That's not a cut through traffic. I'm not sort of using the neighborhood as a through route to get somewhere else. We agree with the logic in general that they applied in the traffic study, that we didn't see it as a significant incentive for cut through traffic. Not saying that if there's an accident at the corner of Pleasant and Union that it wouldn't be used, but you know, on a normal routine basis, we wouldn't expect it to.
And I think, Sean, on the point, Drew, he's talking about, his final part of that statement is, we do not recommend access be restricted at either end other than during construction. So you're saying you don't think it should be blocked off. This part of this design is to have traffic flowing through. That's
Yeah, I would see it as a shame if access was restricted from one side or the other.
right.
Because it just means now if I want to get 2 houses away, I might have to go all the way around and come back.
Right.
And it just didn't seem to be a sort of a corresponding benefit to having sort of that cost.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I also wanted to make clear too, we had some discussion last time about the treatment of the cul-de-sac, the leftover cul-de-sac. And the applicant has done some work with the neighbors to contemplate some improvements in those areas, which were kind of nice. And it's shown on the landscape plan. One of our comments is just to have that work shown on the other plans, but I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that there has been some progress on that.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the town engineer has some concerns.
Yeah, I haven't read Carl's comments yet, so I gotta catch up on
So,
those.
yeah, so that's not a definite as far as
Understood.
what's being proposed on land that the applicant doesn't control.
But you see why it's a good thing to have a discussion about, and not just leave sort of unaddressed. At least let's work through some of these things and hopefully end up at a solution that makes sense.
Board members, any other questions before we open it up to public comments? Mr. Truax, good evening.
I have a couple questions.
No, usually you don't, so.
I know, but I do. Good evening, Rob Truax, GLM Engineering Consultant. Well, I'm gonna be asked to revise the plan, so I just think there's some things here, like Sean had said, that need to be discussed, and a couple of them, one of them is the cul-de-sac. I would like to have the board have a discussion on that before I revise the plans on where we're gonna go with the cul-de-sac at Brook Lane, whether we're gonna eliminate it, do the landscaping as we show, or we're gonna leave it as requested by the town engineer. I think that really needs to be hashed out. The other thing is the traffic consultant has made a bunch of recommendations, and they're in Sean's letter, and he spelled them right out for you. And the question is, are all these things acceptable to the board? Because he's asking for speed humps, and there's one he's asking to put across Union Street. And then there's speed humps within the project, and crosswalks, et cetera. So I don't necessarily want to put all these on the plan if it's not something the boards, or Sean even, is acceptable to. It's these ones here.
Yeah.
So I think they should be discussed, that and the cul-de-sac, before we go into making all these changes to the plan.
Just for clarity, so in the applicant's traffic study, they made recommendations for improvements that surprised me. And Rob speaks to them. They're pretty significant improvements that struck me as being perhaps a little bit more than would be needed. And there's also some other things that I thought were missed. So I listed them in the letter. My suggestion would be you guys look at our comment letter and sort of go back and look at what you guys submitted and revise that list to what makes sense for you.
Yeah, I mean, like, one of them, the stop signs, that's all acceptable, stop lines, putting in, accessible crosswalks, that's all acceptable. But then he goes into the installation of these speed humps. So he was recommending an installation of a raised speed hump across Union Street, so I'm assuming that would be a brook. And then he's saying, one across the site drive at the intersection of Burns, so like where we come into Burns Ave, down here, we put a speed hump within the project. And then the third one is just a pedestrian crosswalk at Brook Lane, which I'm fine with. It was the two speed humps that I had a concern with. I don't wanna put those on the plan, especially the one on Union Street.
Well, we do have a note.
A letter from the fire chief,
department
right.
that does not support a recommendation for speed bumps.
Right, so
for
I,
emergency access routes.
correct, so I wanted to make sure we all understood that before I go put speed humps on the plan. I'm
I
really
guess
not,
what I would suggest is it's the project's traffic consultant
yeah,
that made those recommendations and made those mitigation offers. I think that person needs to either say we don't need them, or,
right.
or
No.
we're in a weird situation where the applicant is actually suggesting something that nobody else wants.
Right.
And that's kind of the point for my comment, is like, I was like, speed humps seem a little bit.
Aggressive.
And particularly
Well, I had actually mentioned that as a possibility at the last hearing, I believe.
It came up and.
You can blame me for that, but.
No, I think he
but it
was
good
just trying to be,
Understand that.
I think he was trying to be overly cautious and come up with some traffic calming things.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't personally have a problem with the one in the project.
Right.
I do think it's a problem to stick one out on Union Street, and I mean, just my own personal opinion, to put a speed hump in the middle of that road. You better put some flashing lights with it.
And here's my issue, is now the applicant's traffic engineer has suggested a traffic mitigation improvement. potentially for safety. It's uncomfortable for me to have the board tell them not to do it. I would much rather have the person that offered them
That's fine.
restate their recommendations so that the board is not contradicting the recommendations of the professional.
That's fine. We'll have a discussion with him about it, but I'm getting my sense that Union Street would not be a.
Union Street's not probably a great idea for anybody in town.
Probably.
But I do think that, the one in the development site might be, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
might be
I was
appropriate.
thinking that myself. I didn't think that one was a problem. It was just the Union one that jumped out at me. And so then I guess the other thing is if we could, maybe the board, or maybe it's not tonight, maybe it's another meeting, but some discussion on that cul-de-sac, what your preference would be. I mean,
I actually think,
and I think,
do we want to take a little bit of time?
I also think maybe we should get if any neighbors here about that, what their preference would be as well. I think that would help, get everyone's opinion on it.
Okay, so,
Why don't I show you what we proposed?
I think it's in your plans, right?
yeah, we have it in the
We have it.
plans. You're talking about,
On the landscape plan, it's not on
Okay.
the plan set.
okay,
Oh, it's not?
Why would it be?
No, but you have a landscape plan here, right?
not,
It's in the, oh, it's in the packet of information.
Thanks, Patrick.
I think that is a separate plan.
Yeah, we did. So, since our last discussion, since our last meeting, I happened to meet with a couple of the neighbors on Brook Lane. There's only 3 homes on Brook Lane, so I've met with 2 of them. And we discussed what their, some of their concerns relative to what had been originally proposed, which was the removal of the asphalt within the turnaround and extending their 2 driveways out to the proposed access road. The consensus was they didn't feel like they'd like to back out of their driveway. It would essentially approximately 65 feet straight out into that roadway. That didn't seem to be very accommodating to them. So what we did come up with was a plan to create a circular drive within the cul-de-sac and on their own private property, so that they would have a turnaround within their property and part of the cul-de-sac, and allow them to make a turnaround and back out to the Brook Lane area. The other concern was, you know, traffic coming in off of Union Street, you know, at night primarily. Headlights would be directly impacting this home at number 8. Brook Lane would be constantly impacted by headlights coming in from Union Street. So we proposed a series of buffer plantings, various locations, to prevent the lighting from being shed onto their home. And that's what we show on the landscape plan. We didn't incorporate that change into the project plans yet until we had a further discussion with the board, because these are all items that there's always a differing opinion one way or the other. But for the homeowner at 8 Brook Lane, based on our conversation, this was a preference that they would like to see, assuming that the cul-de-sac is eliminated as we've proposed it. So rather than it being all lawn area, there'd be a planting of many types of plants for buffering and shielding of light and that sort of thing. We haven't had any conversation with the homeowner on the adjacent lot that's on the cul-de-sac. So we don't know what their preference is, but we did add a landscape bed on their side of the cul-de-sac to give them the same benefit in terms of lights turning in and out. So that's kind of where we're at with that situation. And as Rob said, we're certainly able to make changes to the plans, but would prefer to have a direction which way the town wants to go. Now, we just received the town engineer's comment letter yesterday afternoon, and he's recommending that the cul-de-sac stay in place, that the town needs to have a way to turn their vehicles and trash pickup and so on. And so we're at a crossroads, I guess, in terms of what to do with that. Previous meeting, I've discussed this with the homeowner on Brook Lane, that in terms of, came up the issue of maintenance, of landscape maintenance and so on and so forth. The town doesn't do a very good job of maintaining that roadway as it stands right now. And we are suggesting that if this proposal were adopted, we would maintain the landscaped areas along the sides of the road and the islands that are in there. So we would make sure that it always kept cut, clean, and taken care of.
So would you be willing to install basically buffering trees on the neighbor's property for number 8, and the cul-de-sac would stay there? The resident of 8 Brook Lane would still have access out to the cul-de-sac, but you would plant some buffering trees on their property?
Well, yeah, I guess, we're open to any suggestion. It's just that keeping the cul-de-sac as a paved cul-de-sac is one issue versus us just making it a 90-degree turn into the project, which we had a design at one point. It was my preference at the time when we were designing this to have a nice pathway in, access way in, and redesign the roadway. So we can do it either way, but when we end up pushing the landscaping back to the edge of the cul-de-sac that it is now, it really kind of like closes them in. We can do it, just closes their front yard in, depending on what kind of trees or buffering is planted there, so.
Okay. So you're willing to install buffering trees for the neighbors?
Oh, sure.
We-
Yeah, we've also included buffering trees on the other property, on the sideline of their property as well, which were part of our previous proposal and still has been expanded as a result of this proposal. So we're certainly able and willing to provide that. We just need to know
Okay.
where we're going, if that's a feasible alternative for the board.
I know the residents, do you want to comment on?
Oh, I sure do. So every time I come to this board, I try not to be angry. I try not to be frustrated. It is so hard to sit in those seats, and I have the board, Tetra Tech, and a town engineer basically deciding my fate of my home and how I'm gonna live for whatever many years that I have left there. That's really kind of unfair. I have people saying a cut-through is a really good idea. Well, if you live on Brook Lane, and I got together with my neighbor, and we have a letter and everything else, development traffic is like one situation, but it's the traffic off of Union Street and Pleasant Street and Route 1, because that is a reality. You want to do utility connections and have emergency egress, that's all fine and good. But it's the regular, everyday vehicles who are going to use that as a cut-through. That is a problem. Then we do what the board and everybody in town wants us to do, which is talk to Lou to say, okay, how do you make this work? I know you're not happy about 38 units. What can we do for you? well, when he first kind of showed me the proposal, you know, my driveway gets extended to 60 feet. Well, my husband's a disabled vet, and he can't turn around to back out onto a road 60 feet. So, like, now I have to worry about that. Then the town doesn't want to give up the cul-de-sac. Well, you know, at the end of the day, the town doesn't take really good care of Brook Lane to begin with. So I live there, I would know. And now you want to keep a cul-de-sac, you want to put a road in, and like, I have no say. I can give you my opinion, I can cry, I can yell, but like, it's like if you make a decision where you're like, oh, you're working with the developer and these are some really good things, then the town engineer or whoever else in the town is gonna balk at it. So the only people we ever come to talk to is you. So of course you get the brunt of my frustrations. You know, Lou did a good job, you know, with that. I didn't even think he would be able to do kind of a little semicircle. I thought I was asking for a lot. And he was like, no, this would look nice, you know, it won't be as bad, you know, as you think. You know, that remains to be seen, but okay, at least he did something. I got a privacy fence on one side, because I'm gonna have 38 new neighbors, like, looking out onto my yard and to my windows that I didn't have before. And then I get to have a 300% increase in traffic, and that's just a development. Never mind what's gonna come off of Union Street. So I would be down at the town engineer's office if I had seen that today, because I am so frustrated. So I hope you can just kind of understand that, and know, if that project goes in, I would fight for that, because that's gonna make it better.
Okay, you would like to see the cul-de-sac taken out?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's what we need to know from?
Absolutely,
That's what we need to
100%.
know from the neighbors.
So, now that I yelled, my neighbor Janet Wilmot, she couldn't be here tonight. She lives at 4 Brook Lane. She lived there for close to 30 years. And myself, we got together and we just basically sat and like wrote down all of our concerns. This is a long letter. I'm not going to read you like 7 pages worth of a letter. But I did make copies that you could maybe give to the board members for their kind of reference and reflection as you go to make your decisions. I think they're important. But what I did do is kind of highlight what I thought were some of the key elements that have somewhat been discussed tonight. The first is the traffic review. It minimizes the overall impact to Brook Lane, and again mentions the elimination of the cul-de-sac. If we look at the 3 homes remaining and we estimate 30 trips per day, and the number of estimated trips from the new development, it's a minimum of 300% increase. The traffic review identified various methods to mitigate our concerns to discourage cut-through traffic, manage travel speeds through the development, and provide safe traffic control. Mr. Scully proposed the following mitigation options within the traffic review. The stop signs, install the thickly settled signage with 20 miles an hour, the crosswalks, the raised speed bumps, and a raised pedestrian crossing. On March 9th, the deputy fire chief stated in his letter to the board that the fire department did not support a recommendation for speed bumps. The only other options are signage and a crosswalk. Motorists really pay attention to signage. The fire chief also identified in Commonwealth Mass law indicating that the required width of a fire department access road shall not be obstructed in any manner, including by the parking of vehicles. Is this just for the development, or is it for Burns Ave and Brook Lane? Are they considered access roads to this site? Our question to the board is, where are the current residents or guests of those homeowners supposed to park if Brook Lane becomes a through road and 2-way traffic so as not to impede the fire department? Neighbors on Union Street often have guests park their vehicles on Brook Lane when they have gatherings. Whenever there are police details, tree cutting, road work, etc., those trucks are staged on Brook Lane. Anytime the town of Walpole works on Union Street, they stage their trucks on Brook Lane. Trucks and vehicles are more of a problem for fire trucks than placing a speed bump on the street. To allow a through street is irresponsible and downright inconceivable that the board members would entertain such an option, and furthermore, potentially vote in favor of a through street. To allow a through street without the disposition of the cul-de-sac, you place our families in danger, as Brook Lane would have continuous two-way traffic. As people zip in and out of the new development or decide to turn around in the cul-de-sac, they will inevitably have to swerve to avoid oncoming traffic, and most likely they will end up in my front lawn or my living room of my home at 8 Brook Lane. My family spends a tremendous amount of time outside and in that particular area. That's now where my family will be the most vulnerable. When winter approaches and inclement weather is upon us, the chances of that happening will increase exponentially. If people are not driving slowly, there's surely going to be an accident. During our harshest winters, the snow is so high that only one vehicle can enter or exit Brook Lane at one time. There is simply not enough room for 2 cars to enter and exit simultaneously. At the last meeting, it was clear to me that Brook Lane has become a focal point due to access. At the meeting on February 16th, I asked if all construction was to enter and exit through Brook Lane. The response I received, it was better to have construction vehicles enter and exit through Brook Lane because it lessens the impact to other residents, and the vehicles will most likely be coming via Route 1. So now, Brook Lane residents potentially will endure the construction vehicles entering and exiting for how long of a period? Months or a few years? The dirt and debris left behind as the construction vehicles enter and exit. Who's going to keep the street somewhat void of debris, mud, dirt, etc.? Where are the construction workers going to park? Construction vehicles are relatively large, and it will not be possible for those trucks to enter and exit simultaneously. Having 2 of these large trucks coming and going while the residents coming in and out will cause complete traffic jams. How are the residents going to navigate through these vehicles? There was not a clear answer from the board at the meeting of February 16th as to the process of the disposition of the cul-de-sac. If the board approves the modification and the town denies the disposition of the cul-de-sac, then the town knowingly and willingly are placing the existing residents of Burns Ave and Brook Lane in harm's way. You will not be able to have any on-street parking on Burns Ave or Brook Lane because there will be two-way traffic. Motorists will not follow any speed limit as they speed down the street, or they will be able to maneuver around parked vehicles. It also would not be in line with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts regulations, providing the fire apparatus enough room in some situations. We believe that it is an obligation of this board to ensure the safety of all residents, and it would be a complete act of negligence to vote in favor of a through street. We also believe that a project of this size, in the setting of the established neighborhood, that the burden should not be placed solely on the residents of Brook Lane. However, the residents of 4 and 8 Brook Lane are willing to take on our share of the burden. Therefore, we would request if construction vehicles were going to utilize Brook Lane, that it would be as an entrance to the proposed construction site and exit through Burns Ave. In consideration for residents' safety on Brook Lane and Burns Ave, we would request that the board would vote that this development have a dead end on the Burns Ave side and not allow a through street linking them. In making this request of the board, we recognize that it will increase the traffic entering and exiting Brook Lane. But when looking at the option of a through street, it's the lesser of 2 evils. With the looming question of the disposition of the cul-de-sac and allowing the applicant to modify that area, it would allow additional safety and privacy measures for the 3 existing homes. If we are to incur the construction vehicles for the good of other residents in that area, and we are incurring the additional traffic, then at a minimum to add buffering measures for safety and privacy, we believe is not asking a lot of this board or the town to change the configuration of our existing street. After all, if this modification is approved as it stands, then the town ultimately is reconfiguring and changing where we have chosen to build our lives. And finally, we, the residents, would ask Mr. Petrosi that if these suggestions are considered and approved by the board, then in our opinion, his project has changed once again. The project would have a different entrance and exit area that is much smaller in size, with 3 single-family homes, and the character of the street is much different. We would challenge him to take a moment and assess what he is proposing before this board. Before Wall Street Development pours one foundation and erects one frame to a building, we encourage him to take a hard look at what he is constructing at the end of a small cul-de-sac. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, good evening. Yeah.
Good evening, Jack Conroy, a butter, 36, 34, 36, and 38, 40. I'll start, I think you all have my letter that I was emailed to you people today. Okay, but I'm gonna jump because you're on this cul-de-sac, so might as well keep the conversation going. My first comment is, just like in front of my board, we now seem to have 2 more people as part of this project. And they don't seem to be on as applicants. We now have work being done on 2 of the houses proposed on their land, so that makes them part of the application process. They aren't abutters anymore, they are now part of this application. That, I'm not a lawyer, been doing it enough, but if you're working on their property, they're not an abutter. Would you agree, John?
No, I think what it is, this is mitigation on, it's off-site mitigation,
But
and
it-
we can ask town council, we have town council
Okay.
right here. George, do they become anything different than an abutter when we talk about mitigation on their property?
No. Well, you know, I'll 100% disagree, because I'm tired of these 40Bs and everything's downhill sliding. No, you put someone's land in action, you've now changed it. Now, what Cheryl said too is the fact that this has changed. So now I'll ask a question. I'll start, very simple one. You might understand that you can't change anything you guys had before, it's only whatever they remanded back, or is everything up for grabs?
Town council?
Yeah, your hearing is limited to the changes, but if the changes, consideration of those changes goes into issues that were addressed the first time around, and you need to look at that. You have some leeway to, you're not in a vacuum.
Right, so traffic, traffic on Burns Ave is, affected by this, pedestrian walking from Union Street. So, yeah, so I think the answer is, yes, we are
have this
looking at things, but we also have to be careful that it was remanded back. But I would say, and town council just said, there's a broad range of things that have changed on this project, and they have effects throughout the project.
Okay, I think, I'm not even gonna trust but verify, but I wonder about that 10% that's been thrown out there. Not too sure. All of a sudden, you can't touch me over here, but I can do this. I don't go with that. I think that needs to be stated here by the board at some point, is what the laws are.
I've already stated it.
What?
You're talking about the
Added units.
certificate of eligibility is for 36.
No, I know you did that, John, but I also heard that Mr. Petrosi said 10%. I don't know.
I don't care. We're dealing with a
36.
letter of eligibility for 36 units.
Okay, then fine, you answered my question then. I don't understand how it's 38, so this isn't even my opinion, I would throw this plan out, but I know that's not gonna happen. Now, in regards to the cul-de-sac, I know this 100%. First off, it's outside the purview of this board. It's off-site improvements, meaning that you don't have the authority to say that will be done. You can suggest or make it go better, But you can't say, that's it, and away he goes. You agree?
So on a 40B, the zoning board sits for the other boards in town, as you know. And so one of the things that would, and that's why we ask for input, and we cannot say that the cul-de-sac will come out, but we could put a condition that it will come out, and then that has to be approved by the selectmen, which are the road commissioners, as you know.
Well, this is where I'm gonna go, because my opinion is, you can only do inside, and you can say, yeah, this is what we want when we approve the plan. But you can't burden another board. That's a town street. You have a town street. There's a whole process. First off, is he gonna buy the land, or is it gonna be the town's? How is that gonna work? If the process for this, the way I see it now is if he's proposing to do all this, then he'll have to go to the selectmen, have them declare that as surplus, go to town meeting have to say okay, and then it has to go out to bid. If it's going to go to him as private. If it stays as it is, it's a town, then they'll have to conduct hearings. But when they conduct hearings, it's open to everybody, so if someone doesn't like what's there, the Board of Selectmen doesn't mean your plan is perfect, they can change it. That's a given, because it's on their dime.
Absolutely.
No,
Go
your
ahead.
conditions are your conditions.
Right.
So nobody can waive your conditions of the permit. So if you have conditions related to off-site mitigation, it's a violation of the permit if you can't build it in accordance with that, depending on what happens after. What, if anything, would happen? He'd have to come back for another modification if it turns out that it's impossible for him to comply with conditions that he doesn't appeal. So off-site mitigation is perfectly within your purview. You're also sitting in the shoes of any other town board or committee with respect to any local regulation. So just keep that in mind. It's
So
only under
on-
state law that other boards may have independent jurisdiction of yours. Otherwise, local regulations are within your jurisdiction.
So on the issue of the cul-de-sac, if the zoning board said, yes, do this, what Cheryl wants, we could say that, but what if the select board turns around and says, we're the road commissioners and we're going to keep the cul-de-sac?
Yeah, if it's a matter of property rights, you don't have the jurisdiction to waive the town's property rights.
Right.
And if it ended up being a property issue that arose subsequently, that he can't comply, the applicant can't comply with your permit conditions, he has to come back.
For a
He would have to come
modification.
back and say, yes, I'm seeking a modification because it's impossible for me to comply with that condition. Just like a DEP superseding order of conditions. He has to come back to you if it caused some change in the plan or some inability to construct it as you approved it.
So does-
I just wanted, so Cheryl understands, it's gotta still go to the select, the road commissioners, that's a road, you just can't wipe it out, there's all sorts of steps and processes. Also, you have to deem, I don't know whether the applicant is proposed, he keeps the land of the cul-de-sac, or it just stays under the town, or he gives it to the people, but he can't give it to the people.
Right.
Okay, so there's the issues, I'll go back, I still think they're part of the applicant process, but still, so there will be, if this went through and your recommendation said, we like this, it still has to go to the selectmen and they have to figure out what to do, because now you have an accepted road that you gotta change. That's a whole nother kettle of fish here.
And if you remember, one of the things that I asked was, would Mr. Petrosi be willing to put these buffering trees on Cheryl's property? And the reason is because the whole cul-de-sac issue is gonna be complicated, and it would be a lot cleaner if that was off-site mitigation that he did.
And for everybody, I'm sure you might know it, John, you dealt with it, whoever else here, is the fact that anytime you change anything to a road, you just can't do it because they have mortgages on it and they have to you just can't change a road. That's Mass General law, so you'd have to get permission from the banks. Banks could say no, because they mortgage this property based upon what it looks like now, and they just can't say, okay, that's great. That's another big step in the process, so I just want them to understand, this is not, 100% done. Now, the next point I wanna make is if this goes private, okay, there could be an issue, I'll throw this out now, based upon what I looked at today, is the way this is created, I think at least one of the lots wouldn't have proper frontage. Because with the cul-de-sac, you got your frontage, but by this little zip, they won't have it. And you can't create as you know, you can't create a zoning violation. So I just wanted that pointed out so that everybody understands the whole process of this.
So, we'll see where this goes, but taking out this cul-de-sac, we've already heard from town engineer that the town engineer wants it to stay. It's gonna be complicated. I even think that it's safer so that, as Cheryl said, her husband can back out. Right now, he can back out on a cul-de-sac. He's not backing out into a roadway. So there's a lot of things.
No, I understand, but I just wanted to point out so they understand that you come down the road, oh, this looks great. If that became private, I don't think you have enough frontage. And everybody could think this is the greatest thing, and all of a sudden, oh, we got a zoning violation.
I don't think it's the greatest thing.
But my point, John, is I want to point so everybody understands, especially the people who that's affected. Now, I'll go through some of my items here. You already talked about the 36 units. Now, this is the second filing, correct? Not the first. It's not the original one way back, and we're on submission 2, revision 1, so I should say.
We're dealing with the original permit that was issued. That's what we're dealing with.
The very first one?
The very first one that was approved by the zoning board.
Okay, so that's the very first one that was submitted.
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's good.
Now, council, am I correct? This is a modification of our.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's a modification to the approved comprehensive permit from 2020, so from January of 2020.
Oh, so it's not from the original?
We've only approved one special permit.
Comprehensive.
Comprehensive, right, comprehensive
But that
permit.
was the one the original one, which was approved under appeal, didn't show this cut-through, correct? And that's the one we're dealing with tonight?
Yes.
So the cut-through is way more than, okay, I thought we were dealing with the second one that was something to do with Terratech and didn't pay. So we're going back to the original filing.
No.
No.
Let's get it straight. You have an original approval, it was appealed. While the appeal was pending, he presented a modification.
He bought the house on Brook Lane.
Right, but he presented a modification. Both Mass Housing and the Housing Appeals Committee ruled that that was a substantial modification, and that's why the board voted that it's a substantial modification requiring a public hearing. So you conduct a public hearing the way you would on any other 40B application, and you're limited to the modification. That is the subject of the substantial project change. Despite the fact that you're so limited, if the modification touches on issues that you addressed previously and requires some type of revision or further discussion, you have leeway to go into those areas. The only thing you can't do is start a whole new process on the original application, which you are not doing. So you are addressing the project modification that includes the two ways of accessing and egressing the project site.
All right. Okay. I feel like I just got off the merry-go-round, and I'm still not, but I understand. Okay, so that leads me to my question. Do you have a name at Mass Housing that I can talk to or send something? Because I'm still stuck with that. He didn't make the 1 year. He put on his application denied on the 7th of February, but actually it goes by the decision date. So I do need a name that I can appeal that to.
Okay. Can you get that for Jack
I
at some
think
point?
Mike Busby, Tom Busby. I
Oh,
can
Mike
get you-
Busby, yeah, I've sent him stuff, and it's, might as well throw it into the deep abyss. I guess I'll have to fire up my lawyer just to get that going, because there is no provisions that I see. I know you guys didn't think it was much, but I don't think you have the power to waive it, and I don't
So,
think they have
Jack,
the power to waive
You
it.
did bring this up before.
Yeah.
And we did ask you're talking about the time?
Yeah, the time.
So we did ask town council about that, and you were here for that. And I remember, because
Yeah.
I was on your side for it. I was like, okay,
What happened?
what happened? And town council told us that that was not something that would be upheld at all on an appeal, and it wasn't worth.
No, I'm not saying you guys. Mass Housing never should have sent it, because the application was incorrect. That's what I'm saying.
Because once we had the letter of eligibility and, you know, the filing to us, town council told us that you need to move forward
No,
on
no,
this.
I understand it from your perspective, but it's just like if you put any false information on anything that's found later out, that should be taken. But that's why I want their name. I know it doesn't lie with you guys. All right.
No, but there was also the issue of, that he could have just refiled it. I don't have that opinion, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I also remember there was something to do with, he could have just refiled it. He could have waited like 8 days and refiled it. And so, but if you wanted to play games over it, you could have. But the fact is, you had an eligible applicant at the time. And if anything, it was a matter of 8 days that he could have just simply refiled at that time, is my recollection of it. It's not something, I would recommend strongly the board not to be disrespectful of Mr. Conroy, but I would not waste time debating that issue. It's not an issue before you now.
John, all I asked was, if this is gonna be between me and Mass Housing, and say, do you let people just put falsified information on your applications and give it to them? To me, I don't care if it's 1 minute. That's the way it reads. 1 and 1 is 2. It's not, 3.
Yeah.
But that's a deal between me, that's why I asked. I understand what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing, and I know you guys. I just want the name.
Okay.
But if he's still there. Now, I just want, just so you update, you know, we do have lawsuits, the Campbells and myself on our side of it. What I was interested is when I went through and I know you guys got there, sewer and water. It goes back to December 20th, 2020. The same thing with the Concom goes back to 2020, and the Board of Health goes back to 2020. Have they give you any updates yet?
So in terms of a letter, not directly, I did speak to Scott.
They're supposed to.
Yes, I spoke to Scott Gustafson today. I think he needs to come before their board. They haven't had a meeting yet to discuss
The
it.
sewer and water,
Sewer and Water hasn't been able to discuss it yet.
Well, the fact that one of the things, when I read the sewer and water, they didn't recommend, they said they will either replace the line or put a new one in there, and I didn't see that on the plans. The Concom, we all know, things have changed, and the Board of Health, I assume that's a biggie, just like in any subdivision. Without the Board of Health, you don't go anywhere. But, okay, a couple quick notes. What we heard here today is, you said the road's 24 foot. Now, that's incorrect. The paved travelway is 22 foot because he's using Cape Cod berm. They're a foot wide, each sits on the asphalt. So you got 24 feet, but you take 2 feet away in total. So you only have a 22-foot traveled path. Okay? The next one is the driveway. It shows, it's like a public road. We heard enough discussion on that. I will tell you, I come that way most nights after coming out of the gym, and it's like, going home, no. I don't have to travel that way during the day, but I'm gonna tell you, if I'm coming up Union Street, and I know what that stop sign's like in the morning, I'd be cutting through every time, and I can understand that. But the one thing that kind of, when you look at it, has the traffic engineer told us what the speed's gonna be? Because I look at that like you just, when you come from Burns down, you're going boom, up Brook Street. That whole area there, launching yourself in the brook, that's a nice little speedway, and the same thing coming through. But especially at that, my opinion is, that whole thing needs to be checked as far as what based upon traffic and the curves and everything else, what the maximum, not the maximum speed you're allowed, like 30, but what do they think it could get up to? I think it can get up to a lot, but I think that needs to be checked. The fire truck access, I will be speaking to the deputy chief at some time. But the thing is, you get 22 feet, and one of the things I had spoken to the deputy chief before, we all know this is a private development. If you put no parking signs on a street, you can tow them, cops can come and tick you. Can't hear. No cops, nobody. It's not allowed. I don't care what you put for signs. And if the car's in the way, you can't tow them, because it's private property. So I don't know how that's gonna help, and that's what I've always pointed out to the deputy chief, is when you're on private property, you can't do anything, no matter how much they put there. So that's something to be considered. Now, the other thing is, start posting these signs. I think it was hit upon by, as Cheryl said earlier. You got your driveways, they need to be dimensioned. That comes later on my speech here, but there's no parking for anybody. You got one, and if you don't park in the garage, where they're gonna park? They're gonna park on Burns, in front of my stuff, the Campbell's, and they're gonna park on Brook. That's what's gonna happen. So what happens is, by the sheer fact that they haven't allowed any visitor parking, they have taken their problems and moved them to us. And my understanding of 40B, it's not supposed to affect us in a detrimental way, which this would. Because you go to any one of those houses, and there is no visitor parking. And all the site plans we do for these multi-family houses, Pulte, whatever, they all have visitor parking. And I will say this, every site plan that's Royal Crest, down here, the one going up in Renmar, they all have sidewalks, all of them. That's a necessity. And in this particular one, you know, I don't care if it wasn't shown before. I love that. Well, we missed it, so you're gonna just say, well, you can't do it, even though it's a safety?
No, he didn't say that. So
No.
we do
The-
expect.
The applicant said he didn't have them before, he ain't putting them this time. That's what I heard.
No, that's not what he said. What he said was he was gonna look at the sidewalks.
Yeah, okay, gonna look. All right, but I'm just throwing that out at you. Now, the other thing is this is mine and the Campbell side. As you know, we're in a lawsuit, and it's whether he has right to access. But the road is private from the 440-foot mark down. We own to the center line, Campbell's own to the center line. So we really own the street. And if he doesn't have any rights to ownership of that, because where we are. Now, I know in the last one, and I would like it to be, in the event that he is successful with his lawsuits and the things are ready to go, that this road needs to go in front of the town per the Mass General laws that require you to go in front of a board, which would be the planning board, to have this road laid out, built and accepted as a public road. The reason I say that is, myself and the Campbells shouldn't bear the cost burden for the rest of our lives because they're going in and out of that condo complex. So if we're supposed to be Burns all the way to the end, then to me, it should be made that the applicant, I think that's not even more than fair, that's right. That it should be put in there that they have to take it all the way to public acceptance in town meeting. Because we should not bear the burden of owning that and maintaining it. The other thing is, I'll spin it a little bit, you always got that legal, is if it isn't plowed, isn't salted, someone goes off, they're gonna sue me or they're gonna sue the Campbells, who's going in there. That shouldn't happen. So the road should go where it should be, and it should be brought forth to the town for, that would make the most sense in the world. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. And it shouldn't be putting burden on us. We're basically the driveway for the condo unit. And I don't think so. And the road isn't in great shape anyway. And we don't need to spend the money. That's not ours. So I would like that being put in there. It's a very simple one. I mean, why wouldn't you do it?
So the condition would be that the applicant has, depending on the outcome of the lawsuit.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
Okay.
if he wins.
Okay, but the applicant would be required to make Burns Ave an accepted road to his property.
Yeah, an accepted road.
So, first off, I agree with you, it should be accepted, but now we're asking the applicant to do something with property that is not his.
No. Ready for that one?
Okay. First off, Jack, I agree. It should be an accepted road if that's the outcome. But I think the town should do that, not the applicant.
Well, first off, the town isn't gonna do it. It's a private road. They can't do it. Okay, but there is a chapter in Mass General Laws, believe me, I've read it, is it says if you live on a private road, because what happened back in this, we had all these private roads up until the 70s, and the towns weren't gonna do it. I mean, if you remember Juicy Drive and all those, that's what I think of, they're all dirt. Someone says, I want it upgraded. The town didn't have the money to do it. So what they said is, you can own to here, he can own to there, you own it. It got rid of it. But there is a statute there that says if you were one of the people on the road, you can petition the town to bring it forth to have it accepted. But you, as a petitioner, have to pay for the whole deal. So us and the Campbells wouldn't have any rights, if it being a private road, to say, no, we don't want it. Because he's trying to bring a road that should have been a town road up to where it should have been, so that you don't have any rights. That's in the book. So we're not asking him to do anything he can't do, we're asking him something that's already allowed to do. And it makes sense if you think about it, is if I'm sitting at the end of the road, I'm tired of the bumps, and I get some extra money, yeah, I'll do it. So you just take what's down there for a layout, and they could bring it in front of the boards, and then bring it right to town meeting.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm just going quickly. My opinion, because I did it on my little work computer, is I know why we're doing the road like this on the brook, because I don't believe the fire trucks can make that turn if it went at almost a 90-degree, and if you did, I believe you would lose a couple units, and that was confirmed a little bit with Kyle Balla recently. So that's why that's the way it is. I already went through the roads and so on. The other thing that's always on the plans, snow storage. And I had that discussion with Kyle, but myself, who does the plowing. You know what's gonna happen? Guy's gonna run right through that development, it's gonna push it in front of mine, or go back the other way and push it in front of Brook Lane. And where's the town going to come down Burns Ave and put it? Because now we got their road right there. And where, if you build a cul-de-sac, get rid of it like it is, there's no place for them to push. Guys like to push. And when they push, they'll probably rip up every tree and piece of grass at the end of Brook, but I'm just saying. So that is a very key item here. There is no storage, snow storage on site. There's no place to push it, and nobody said how. I know how you can do it, but whether the applicant wants to, which probably he does not. So that's something to be considered down the road on your plan. And the other thing here's something, and I said I will talk to the deputy chief, Paul Barry, but it's gonna be like a throughway. How do you guarantee they're gonna plow it or salt it? That's a problem. I mean, you can write the condo docs all you want. I was involved in the condo up here on Main Street for over 30 years. And every time we got less on money, the guy running said, we'll skip it. That's what happens. We're not gonna plow this week, we're not gonna salt. Well, this is a little bit different if you need fire trucks down there. So that's something. There's a hydrant. They're showing they're moving off Brook Street. The only hydrant on Brook Street. They're showing it to go to his property. That's not a recommended idea because now you have no public hydrant on Brook Street. So if that hydrant fails, they don't care because they got a couple others. If it's stays on public property and it fails, then you just call the sewer and water and they come and fix it. So you don't want to get in the habit of putting a town hydrant on private property. And like I said, there's nothing about Brook Street and their water on the sewer and water's last comments. The other thing is, I'll go back to the existing plan. We have an existing plan which doesn't exist. That's kind of unique, I would say. And now that we said, and to me, if I was sitting up in yours, I'm a little bit more forward about these things, is nothing's changed, we only deal with what we have. Well, there's nothing left there. You took all the trees, you took the house down. So to me, that's not an existing plan. But more importantly, when you look at it, you don't see what they're gonna do with it. You don't even see that they're gonna remove it. It's kind of implied, but implied can mean a lot of things, and all of a sudden, they don't wanna build the extra 3 or 4, and they just, we never said we're taking the house down. And going back to construction, that was one of my things here, is one of the things in my business, we do this all the time, is a lot of you guys deal with the final plan, I understand. Everybody forgets about getting to the final plan to build. And that's where most of your crap happens with all the neighbors. The trucks. Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, a 10-wheel is probably about 9 foot, maybe a little bigger, put the mirrors on. So he's probably taking up almost a 12-foot swath. So if he's going down the street that's only 22 foot wide, him and the other guy are gonna go boom. So that's something to consider, but also the fact that you talked about the stone out. To me, is there gonna be a cop there with a gun saying, no, you can't come out this way? No, they're gonna go whatever way is the most convenient. So that never works out. The only time I've seen it is in Boston, but you also have detail cops there all the time on anything in Boston. So that's something to consider. I didn't see anything about temporary trailers where they're gonna do their sales or anything like that. And I don't even see any temporary fences around here. So my opinion is you need a full construction. You got what you want to do when it's all nice and you're mowing the lawn, how it's going to be conducted during the day. Well, we've already cut the first tree and all we've done is the first hole, but after that, what it's going to look like, how we're going to control the site. Another a good point, even though I know it's my tenants, but you're going to have guys parking all over the place down there, and there ain't no place really to park. So that's another consideration. So what you,
So we did have a condition that parking for all construction was on-site. It was not,
oh,
not
that's fine.
off-site.
I appreciate that, John, but what my suggestion would be, you need a plan to back that up, how they're gonna manage that. And what are the ramifications if they don't do it? So, and it doesn't
I
matter.
can tell you what the ramifications are. It's a violation of the comprehensive permit, and the building inspector can cite them.
I also have, what was filed back in 2019 by Ashley about them clear cutting, and nothing ever happened. That's my next step, to go down the building inspector. We're talking 2 years of zoning violations, and nothing's happened. So, I mean, you guys won't be down there policing it, but I'm just saying is, have something so everybody understands. So also the neighbors, because that's probably more their concern. You know, I don't live there, but they want to know what how it's going to look, where the guys are parked, and so on and so forth. So that's very key for them during the construction, when all the crap is flying around in the air. My opinion, but I'll say as an expert, because I've done this for over 40 years, the plan is very lacking. This is what we call in my world a design development stage, because there's a lot of missing information. None of the driveways are dimensioned. There's not even a cross-section of driveway. That driveway could be dirt for all we know. There's nothing that calls it, I found on the plan that said it's asphalt. So every little detail, if you don't get it on the plan, there will be a fight. So, so I couldn't find what it says for the driveway. I assume it's asphalt, but doesn't say it. And if you don't put it on there, you're gonna get, and the same thing with any other little details on the sheet that need to be put there. Dimensions and all that, it really needs to be sharpened up, because if this goes through, it's gonna be a circus. And if you don't put it on there and you don't wanna be, well, yeah, no. And so we just wanna make sure that everything is defined, that's all. So that if someone sees something and it says 20 feet, and it is 20 feet, they can't call you guys. But if it isn't, they don't know what it is, we're gonna get all sorts of calls. Or you are, not me, but that's what I'm saying. Very detailed oriented. And one thing is, since these are kind of all new and different than that, I haven't seen any renderings. Do we have renderings yet?
As far as elevations for the
Yeah,
buildings?
the requirements of the 40, we do have them?
Yeah. So,
I went online to see them. I saw the plans, but I didn't see anything. Was it submitted in this submission?
No, with the submission, no.
no,
No, we only have the original.
the original elevations.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed from that. These are the exact same or whatever. That's another interesting thing is, I haven't seen anything. I assume these are the same architectural. Building 4 is the same size building 3, and we do have architectural prints that delineate exactly how big these units are and so on and so forth. But I haven't. So, those basically are my comments. I mean, this is more as we're getting, I don't want to say close to the finish line, but the fact that I want to reiterate what goes on Brook. Also the fact that Campbell's and I shouldn't be responsible for maintaining a street that we have no control of, and just to make it work would be the smarter one. And, one last question. There was last time you guys talked, it was how many days? Was it 120? Was it, I didn't hear the finality of the time. You got notified December 6th, and it was like.
So, right now, the deadline for closing this hearing is April 5th. That's what we're looking at. And then how long after that for after?
40 days.
40 days after it's closed. And did you confirm that?
I'm confident of it, but.
Okay, and then 40 days to have a decision.
So in about 3 weeks.
Unless the applicant gives us an extension, which would be a wise thing to do, but we'll see.
Okay. when will, well, are they gonna give you the plans on the 4th? I mean,
Plans,
if he's gonna have to revise them, my
Right.
guess. But what is the drop dead date for getting to you people that have to be
we'll
distributed?
talk about that as we talk about, you know, extensions.
Okay, I just wanted, because we haven't seen the lighting plan, and that was supposed to be here by now, and I kept hearing how easy it is to do. I guess it must be a little harder than we all thought, so. All right, so April 5th is the last day?
Well, as of right now, unless the applicant grants an extension.
What day is the 5th? Is it a Wednesday?
When, I don't know.
Tuesday.
Tuesday. So,
It's gonna be very hard for you to,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to conduct the further proceedings in a very different way if the applicant does not grant an extension. Because you're not even close to having enough, detail and information to, you know, end up meaningfully discussing whether you want to approve the change, and if so, how that would be conditioned.
Right.
So I usually speak when spoken to, but I just wanted to make that point, which I'm sure you agree with.
Yeah.
So I would implore the applicant to definitely strongly consider an extension of the public hearing to get a real decision on this.
and I would, I don't mean to wave, but anyway, I'd ask that your guy here, Patrick, get all over these other boards, and get their things in. Yeah, can't wait. That's another key things you guys need ahead of time. The town is lax on that, so, and they gotta understand, we gotta have them by this certain date, so, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Good evening, Mrs. Campbell.
Good evening, Kathy Campbell, 35 Burns Ave, thank you. May I just ask a clarifying question? Talking about the sidewalks and a statement in the conditions, which I'm not saying I support, but on the original permit of January 20, F5 states that the sidewalks on Burns Ave must be 5 feet wide on both sides. And in speaking to all the comments tonight, how does the board go back and review all the original conditions and marry them up with the conditions that might need to be made with respect here? So again, I don't think it's a big deal going from 5 feet sidewalks on Burns Ave to 4 feet sidewalks inside the project, but as I sit and look at all the prior conditions on the original permit, how are those sort of married up with this process? I understand we're not rehashing those.
Yep.
I just want to understand how that,
I will let town council answer that.
okay.
Yeah, this was the leeway I'm talking about before. If there's some condition that you come up with based on the modification, and that necessarily requires you to revisit certain conditions on the original approval, as a practical matter, you can look at those. But if it's a matter that you said 5, well, I'm not gonna give examples. That's basically the
But-
general rule you have to follow.
To Mrs. Campbell's point, all the conditions that are on the permit that we've already issued, those still stand.
Correct. If, in the event you were to approve the modification with conditions, you would just supplement your prior decision. You would incorporate all conditions of the original permit except as, modified herein in your modification decision. And then they're both, operable documents that are the permit.
So they either supplement each other, or you would modify the original conditions to include this modification?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Does that sound reasonable to, that's
But that's why I'm saying I'm not gonna give an example, because I don't know enough. I defer to the professionals, the design professionals, about, if we're talking about a sidewalk on the project now itself, because of the pass-through issues or whatever, is that incompatible with the 5-foot width ordered for Burns Avenue originally? I don't know that. But if there were some reason to make it consistent, then yeah, that would fall within your purview on the modification.
But is your concern that conditions that we already all agreed to would change or disappear? Is that what you're concerned?
No, I think, town council, I think I understand. I understand the original conditions stand as they were issued in January of 2020, and that the modification is dealing with this particular change in that permit. I was curious, as we started talking about snow removal and traffic and sidewalks, I was rereading the original conditions and said, how does this board go back and look at the original condition? I know you're not gonna rehash them, but how do you look at the original conditions to see if they are in fact compatible with conditions that you're making on this particular project? I thought I heard
You
tonight.
would have to look at that.
Okay.
You-
I thought I
absolutely.
heard tonight that there were no conditions on sidewalks, and I thought, well, I know there is, because that's something that again, I'm not supporting that condition, given the current litigation that's underway, but I just wanted to make sure that that was a process for which the board would have to go through. Thank you.
Mr. O'Leary, good evening again.
John O'Leary, Washington Street. One question, I noticed a couple of the new traffic, fire truck turning plans. And one is showing coming in from Burns Ave and one's coming from Union Street. My comment through you is, the one coming through Union Street is showing it coming from the direction of Route 1. And based on common knowledge, if something is coming via Union Street, it's coming from the East Waffle Fire Department, and it's gonna come up from the Pleasant Street side. In which case, it needs a different turning radius, because that's a much different turn coming from the Pleasant Street side of Union Street into Brook Lane than the easy turn from the Route 1 side of Union Street into Brook Lane, where it's not able to cross a couple lanes of traffic to get there. So I thought that should be mentioned for you to review, have the fire department review if they haven't already. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. I'm actually looking for that plan. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Put the fire department review all these things, right?
Mr. Truax, can you provide us the turning radius from Union Street coming from Pleasant on to Brook Lane, as Mr. O'Leary just pointed out? So what we have is, yeah,
Sean has it.
I didn't draw that.
yeah, I just see it's from your company. See how it's coming in this way?
He's using my sheet, but I didn't.
Okay, but,
He didn't give you one?
oh, there it is.
Is that leaving? No, it's coming in. The arrows are pointing that way. Why is it on this side? Looks like it's leaving. Maybe that's leaving. It's got the arrows, 'cause that's on the wrong side of the road. It's on this side of the road.
Well,
We'll get one. I'll have him
let's
do
get
one
this
on the other side.
addressed and
Yeah, I'll have
updated
him do
as
that.
far as what that is.
Those are the only two you had, you have another one? Yeah, that one was leaving. He just had the arrows
This
pointing.
is,
That's the same, just a smaller scale. Oh, just a reduced plan, that's all.
it's coming down Burns Ave.
No, this one's going this way, going out. This one's coming, the other one was coming out of there, though. It was just, it had to be, it was on the wrong side of the road the whole way. Unless it's,
So,
in another country.
either way.
Yeah, I'll have him, we'll change it over. I'll get him to do another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we just need one coming in.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
thank you, Mr. O'Leary. So we need that updated. Okay, anybody else? Sean, do you have anything else to add at this point?
Yeah, I want to see, George brought up some interesting points that, one of my prior comments recognized that at the time of your last decision, you had the luxury of knowing that the Conservation Commission was gonna issue a permit and have conditions. We're at a point now where the conditions that the Conservation Commission issued no longer apply. And in my prior letter, I think I recommended that the board consider the conditions that the Conservation Commission had planned to impose, that no longer impose, and that maybe it warrants some additional consideration for those things by you under this decision. I just wanted to make sure that I understood
Okay.
clearly whether or not you could do that or not.
Okay, walk us through the process. The reason why the conservation conditions don't apply is because the superseding order of conditions?
Correct.
Okay.
And DEP's decision did not have the same conditions as the Conservation Commission.
So what you're saying is the zoning board should, or could, use the Walpole's conservation conditions, or?
I was gonna say, I think, well, through you, Mr. Chair, in the original comprehensive permit for the 32-unit development, those conditions from the Conservation Commission, some of those were factored into the board's comprehensive permit. I think one was the degraded, the 25-foot no-build zone, and it's plan to have plantings, just offhand. And I know in our second modification, back in the spring of 2020, some of those conditions were brought up and modified per the applicant's request, and we went through those back in May of '21.
I would just add, you would need to, it's a very good point, good to have all the issues out there now, but you'd have to look back, and there's a difference between conditions that you included in the permit on the commission's recommendation and with you standing in their shoes under the local bylaw. That's different than conditions which they imposed that were superseded by Mass DEP under the State Wetlands Protection Act. So just the fact that you have a superseding order doesn't necessarily mean that you would want to negate all of your Conservation Commission related conditions in the original permit. But you would want to run through them, you know, by the end.
Conservation Commission should weigh in on that, give us a memo.
Yeah, makes sense. Patrick? Yep. Can you have the Conservation Commission weigh in on,
Yeah, I mean,
on that specific issue on those, right, Bob? That's what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would appreciate their guidance as well as the other town departments, but as to whether any of the concerns they had under the local bylaw persist, given the change in the plan, and if not, or maybe they have new concerns that we should be aware of.
I can relay that again.
Okay, thanks.
And on a lighter note, as my wife's name is Cheryl, and I find that the more you do what Cheryl tells you to do, the better off we all are. Cheryl.
Okay.
He's pretty good.
Okay, anybody else on Burns Ave? Okay. Mr. Petrosi? Hello. How are you? Let's talk about, we have a lot of work to do on this still.
I've listened very intently to Mr. Conroy and found it very interesting, but as I see it, there are two basic issues here that need to be addressed. One is the cul-de-sac and the right-of-way, public way, and the second being whether or not this should be a cut-through or a through street. I'm happy to do either one. I can make it a dead end in a heartbeat. I can keep the cul-de-sac where it is, the stroke of a pen from my duty engineer here. So happy to give the board additional time if you give us some direction on which to go. You've said in the past, we're not gonna design your project. Well, you're at the point now where you've raised a bunch of issues, and quite honestly, I quite don't know what you want or
Okay,
what you
so
want us to do.
from tonight, sidewalks, need to look at sidewalks inside the development.
Oh, yeah, that was the third thing.
And as far as, I think there's conversations you have to have with the town engineer on the whole possibility of doing this cul-de-sac, you know, where that's gonna lie, okay?
I understand, but we've had this discussion before, and we've proposed what we proposed in light of the conversations that we've had before. So we have a general disagreement, let's say, over how this project should be designed and what is the best, in our opinion, interest of the traffic flow in and out of the development. The town engineer is of protecting whatever they think is necessary for turnaround, plowing, other things. We have the same issue on Burns Avenue. They plow the street, they're plowing it on private property. They want easements We have two parties at the end of Burns Avenue that aren't cooperative. So you're putting the burden on us to provide an easement when you can't get to our property without getting an easement from those parties. So I'm not gonna, it seems to me that I could avoid this process just by putting a cul-de-sac and having a one-way in and out from Brook Lane. I can do that in a heartbeat and resolve all of these issues. Maybe incorporate a sidewalk, eliminate the improvements on Burns Avenue, and just go with that. I mean, we're going back and forth on the same things every meeting.
And when, town council, I don't think it's appropriate for us to say, put a cul-de-sac anyplace.
I'm not saying it is, but we came here, we posed the modification because the board, during the prior hearing process, expressed a concern of public safety. That's the reason why we did it, okay? So now we do it, and we propose it, we've gone to quite a bit of expense and, you know, to do it, and now we're hearing, well, we don't want it, we got parties on one side that don't want it, and other people on the other side that don't want it. So, nobody wants this through street, according to what I'm hearing, so.
So, Mr. Petrosi, the zoning board can only look at what's before us, and what we have before us is a through street. If you want to propose something different, we'll take a look at that. Town council, should we be saying that we want a cul-de-sac or whatever you're proposing at this point?
I mean, if you're ready to discuss that type of thing, the fact that an abutter may have expressed an opinion to you, which is her right to do, doesn't mean that you're gonna follow exactly what she's saying. I mean, you're gonna have to discuss what conditions you want to impose. I would imagine you're gonna largely follow the recommendations of your local personnel, which is normally what you do, the town engineer or peer reviewer, you know, so.
So the plan we have before us is what we're working on.
Okay, well then, what are we, so tell me what additional information the board is looking for that they would need additional time to discuss further an extension, if we were to grant an extension.
So, I already said the updated plans with the sidewalks.
Sidewalk
Okay.
and the punch list items.
We also even heard this, I noticed that there's a fire hydrant that's been moved from town property onto your site property.
The fire chief has commented on that.
Yeah, okay, so these are things that, you know, need to be addressed. Other things?
Updated elevations for the new.
Updated elevations for the buildings?
Well, in the original approval, it was subject, providing the elevations were subject to, as a condition of approval, so that I don't think is on the table.
Town council, is that something that we can ask for? Because we did get
Following that,
updated elevations and we did have updated elevations at one point.
We've provided elevations to the board consistent with the original approval.
Right.
But in the original approval, it was a condition of approval that we provide them, not that we provide them in advance. So what the board member is requesting is that we provide elevations today.
Because things have changed. Right.
well, I mean, are there additional waivers needed under the modification? That's really what you gotta be focused on. Are there, you know, is there a height waiver?
No.
I mean, those are really the issues.
Okay, there's
So
no
if
height
there's not
waiver.
something, if there's not some new waiver issue presented by his modification, you can't kinda go
So
back and revisit.
he submitted elevations of what these buildings are gonna look like. In this new plan that we have now, they're gonna be different. Do we have?
If they're different, he should provide
Right.
information about what's different.
I'll look at it.
That's for sure. I mean,
What else? Other things that we want on this?
Lighting plan?
Lighting plan, yeah. Okay. Other things?
And did any of the town comments require responses? I've not seen them.
I mean.
I just don't know.
Yeah, there's a number of issues that were raised by the different,
I mean, you would want responses from the applicant about the in response to the comments, even if the response is, I don't agree, I'm not doing that, or I agree, we'll have that in the plan. You want that type of analysis on the record.
So we have from the town engineer, there's a number of comments that need to be addressed. We have from the fire department, 11 comments that need to be addressed. So those need to be addressed.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we also like the traffic report to be clarified. to
About
the
this.
locals.
We're
The
gonna
speed bumps.
we're gonna modify the traffic report to eliminate a few things.
Visitor parking.
Yep. Visitor parking. So,
You had that on the original plan, when you came down Burns, there was spots there, but
think that- yeah, I
they
think-
ended up going away, and I don't know
I'll take
if
that.
that was intentional or not, but.
I mean, you should get an answer on that. That's another example of something totally within your purview on the modification. In other words, if you're looking at the modification, you'd say, well,
What
with
happened
a
to the-
different layout, we want guest parking.
Right.
And so I don't know if that's what
Yeah,
you're
no.
saying, but if you are, the applicant should look at it and either say to you, here's where the guest parking will be, here's what it is, or, no, I'm not providing anything else, here's what I'm providing.
guest parking is different, and also, I believe there was snow removal, there was snow storage on the original plan. That was shown, so also that.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Conroy.
Since this is a new plan, and I asked, if you're talking about traffic, you need something to tell us, everybody's talking speed bumps, so that tells me that's a pretty slick street, so you need something for their traffic engineer to say what they figure the speed the guy could reach, not what it's supposed to that, because the way it's done now.
We'll have the traffic report modified. We'll either include those speed bumps or we'll eliminate them.
Okay, and how about speed postings through the site?
Okay, we'll do that. I mean, let me ask you, so if the fire chief says that he's not supporting speed bumps, would you eliminate them because the traffic guy says that he wants them, or would you keep them? We're gonna take them out because the fire chief, that's the comment, that's how we're gonna resolve the comment.
Right.
Okay, just so you know.
But Lou, your traffic consultant should pose recommendations that are warranted.
Exactly.
Justification for those recommendations.
Right.
If someone precludes you from doing those recommendations, then that's a separate issue.
Right, well, as the town council just said, the board's gonna support what town officials or.
I said you tend to do that,
Tend-
but.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's the tendency. So if a fire chief, in my experience, as this board and other boards have done, they've support the recommendations of the department head or the engineer or whoever, you're gonna support that, and you're not gonna require speed bumps. So why are we banging our heads up against the wall to propose something that's not gonna be agreeable?
Because Lou,
It was your traffic engineer.
the board's opinions should inform your consultant's
Yeah.
opinions as to what's required and what's necessary.
I'll speak to our traffic guy and we'll straighten him out.
Yeah, Mrs. Campbell.
Was there a comment about the dimensions of the driveways? Is that related to putting in sidewalks and that changes
Yeah.
the required driveways, which
Well,
might change the building?
it might change the position of the buildings with the sidewalks and things like that. Okay, so,
Those are beautiful things. All right, so when is your next meeting? What is your meeting schedule going forward?
so I think we need time on this, and you need time on this. Our next meetings are coming up.
April 6th. April 20th. The 6th and the 20th.
How is, yeah, he's gonna need more time.
Yeah, I just those are the next.
We,
April 6th, or April 20th.
So we're gonna need, these plans have to be revised.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just
Okay.
asking for your schedule.
So I'm just thinking, you're talking, over a month out, right?
I just asked for your schedule.
Okay, so
There you
what-
go, Joe.
yeah.
Tell me what the options are.
First and third Wednesday of the month, so wait,
Excuse me?
first and third Wednesday of the month.
Right, so the third Wednesday is in spring vacation, right?
Yep,
Is
that's
it
the
20th?
20th.
Yeah.
So is the board gonna meet the following week, or is it gonna just skip
The
that?
next one would be May 4th or May 18th.
Wow, guess we can go on vacation. I'll agree to, listen, I don't, I'll agree to continue the hearing until May 4th, and I'll give you an extension until May 5th.
No, how about the end of May?
Well, because if you close the hearing, you have 40 days. I mean, what's the end of May gonna do?
Just in case, I mean, one day is not, that's not enough.
One day is just for the hearing, it's not necessary for the decision date.
Right, but we need more than one day after the hearing.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, why not at least extend it to the third
Well,
Wednesday?
the
That
next
other
meeting-
Wednesday.
The
what's
29th.
the second meeting in?
The 20th.
The 18th is the second meeting in May, so.
Okay, May 18th.
Okay,
We'll
May
ex-
18th.
We'll extend it to May 18th.
Okay. Could I have a motion to continue this hearing until May 4th, and at the request of the applicant, extend it until May 18th?
So moved.
Extending the deadline to close the public hearing.
Close the public.
So moved.
Okay.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock at Town Hall, thank you. So that's moved by Dave, second by Jane. Any further discussion on continuance and extension? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained, so carried. Okay, so that's that. Okay, let's just take like 2 minutes, and we will, we'll get ready for Doopy Street. This is still the zoning board of appeals. This is for case number 0520, on remand from the Housing Appeals Committee. The Housing Appeals Committee mediated revision to the previously denied comprehensive permit application, Wall Street Development Corporation, Housing Appeals Committee docket 21-4, to review proposed changes to ingress and egress on the project site from High Plain Street, Route 27, Dupuy Street. This is in zoning district Residence B, and it was continued from last month. So at the last month's hearing, we talked specifically about the safety of the turning into Dupuy Street. We had a number of neighbors there that spoke on it, and really what we wanted to do was be transparent with the neighbors so they understood what the zoning board was facing, where we are facing, we had denied the project, and the applicant appealed it. It went to the Housing Appeals Committee, who then said, why don't you folks see if you can come to mediation on this? We had a day of mediation. Bob Fitzgerald and I were at the mediation. And at the end, things maybe were better on the turning radius of the fire trucks into the site, but it still was crossing the yellow line. We heard from neighbors, and at this point, what I want to do is just find out where the board is on this. Is this something that we need to move forward with on, conditions, or are people still concerned about the safety, and, at what point are we at this, with the board? Town council, is that okay that we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had a pretty exhaustive discussion last time, and neighbors weighed in. You discussed amongst yourselves what the procedural status was, and it really did come down to the issue of if the board is inclined to want to accept the modification and go ahead and grant the permit with substantially the same conditions as you had applied previously. But it kind of comes down to that issue if the board is inclined to think that that's enough of a change in favor of the project to go ahead and do an approval.
Okay. So, I want to find out where board members stand on this. So, with the 5 voting members on this, there'll be the regular members. So does anybody want to start out on where you stand on this?
John, just a point of clarification, this is specifically on the encroachment of the fire apparatus coming 12 inches or so over the line to make the swing into the property, right?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, the safety of the fire apparatus entering the property.
So, I don't personally see that as a significant safety issue.
Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think it's better than it was. Our peer reviewer said that it satisfies the DOT standards. And as a practical matter, there's nothing that prevents a fire truck or another emergency vehicle from crossing over the yellow line. There's no law that prohibits that. And in fact, the law is that you're supposed to pull over so that there's plenty of space for emergency vehicles to transit safely. So, and on the flip side, I think if were we to stick with a denial, I think we put at risk a lot of good work that we did in terms of reducing the scale of the project and a lot of other conditions that we had worked up last time around. So I'm leaning in favor of approving the modification.
Drew or Jane?
Well, I hate to be a naysayer again, but I'm still concerned about the safety issue. And I'm looking to the decision that we're looking at. In the event of emergency, any vehicle illegal parked on Dupuy Street could present a significant public safety concern for emergency vehicles. While both fire apparatuses could perform turnaround at the cul-de-sac, only the shorter pumper truck was shown to be able to make a right-hand turn on Dupuy Street from High Plain. The plan sheet detailing the Waffle Fire Department ladder truck entering and exiting Doopy Street with a right turn movement from and onto High Plain Street shows the truck unable to safely make a turn without having to first swing left into our traffic. Walpole Fire Department, as stated in their recent project letter to the board, indicated this proposed turning movement was a dangerous maneuver, and if possible, the site's entrance should be reevaluated. And I'm really and truly, the fire department, you know, they usually don't make statement, at least it's in my recollection here, they'll say, this could be okay, that could be, this doesn't sound like that. This sounds like if the proposed entrance was a dangerous maneuver, and if possible site's entrance should be reevaluated. The safety concern has been a major, major factor. The board continued further peer review of the plan through the peer reviewer. Now, I still have, and I realize, I know the stakes are high, George, in terms of whether we, but I'd have a hard time with this, I really do. If I lived on Doopy Street and the fire department had this kind of a comment about something that was gonna go on, I'd be very, very, very disturbed.
Just, through you, Mr. Chair, so that was comment 18 on the factual findings that you referenced. So that does continue on to detail the revised plans through through mediation as a way to address those concerns brought up from the fire department's letter.
So these things have been rectified.
We can address the mediations. We don't have a comment letter from the fire department given that's in.
No, we don't, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that those statements pertain to the original application before, and that was the view of the board at that time, given the larger swing into the other
Do we have
traffic.
anything in writing that's changed since then from the fire department?
Well, they've reviewed this, but we don't have anything that I'm aware of.
There was a modification, let's be clear though, that there was a modification,
Mm-hmm.
and that was commented on by the peer reviewer. You did not receive a new comment on it from the fire department. And the modification presented by the applicant definitely doesn't resolve the issue, but it was meant to address that concern that you were just reading from, and that's where it ends up. So either the board is satisfied that it's been sufficiently mitigated so as to, warrant granting the permit in accordance with all the other conditions that you have, or you're not satisfied with it. But that what you just read, that was that's what the
Initial thrust.
focus of the mediation was can they modify this plan to make it, to address that concern? And that's what the modification is before you. That also had to do with the, moving the utility pole. That was part of this modification that came as a result of the mediation.
Hey, Drew?
So, with moving the pole for the entrance swing onto Doopy Street, I spent some time down there today, over the last few days, just kind of walking back and forth and looking at it. There's still a very challenging line sight, whether it's moving one pole so a fire truck can enter, or it's somebody pulling out of Victoria's Circle, taking a right and coming into contact with something there. There's a lot of different challenges that I think, and approving to put 8 more units up onto a tight, narrow roadway, and potentially having fire apparatus enter and exit that property is concerning to me, and I'm not in favor of it.
Okay. So, and my opinion of it is that it is unsafe. This, a board in this town would not approve a project like this for a regular subdivision. I think that we do a disservice to our community if we allow something like this when we sit here and we know that there's a safety aspect to it. And it's almost offensive to think that we're saying, well, it's an affordable housing development project, and the safety outweighs the need for affordable housing. I don't think safety outweighs the need for affordable housing. I think it should be done safe and quality housing for people that will live in our community in the future and people that live here now. So I'm opposed to it. I also am fully expecting that, you know, the reality is that this will probably not go well for the town, but in some ways, I don't want to be the person that said it's okay to do in the town of Walpole. And if somebody else in Boston or someplace says, well, it is, they can live with that. But I travel Route 27, all of you travel Route 27, and I think that we need to do the best we can to keep things safe for everybody. So I'm going to be opposed to it. So that actually leads me to the next question as far as moving forward, if we need to go through the waivers and everything, but I think that we don't need to go through the waivers at this point, and we can just have a vote, and we'll have a decision drafted within 14 days. You know,
Yeah, I would maybe consider, are you ready for me to weigh in on that?
Yeah,
Okay,
wait, yep.
thank you, I
Yep,
apologize.
yep.
I
No,
normally,
no.
normally speak when spoken to.
No.
Yeah, if you've got a 5-member board voting on it, you just took a general consensus. It looks like, you know, a motion to approve the modification and issue an approval decision with conditions would probably fail if you were to take that vote. It might be, as long as we have time under the remand order, you might want to keep the hearing open for one more session to consider a denial decision. That, because the draft decision that Patrick put before you is an approval. And if you're inclined that, you know, an approval is gonna fail, you're probably gonna wanna look at what a denial decision would look like, as opposed to closing it tonight and then, another option, you could, go ahead, close the public hearing tonight, vote on, whether to, grant or deny the permit pursuant to the remand. And maybe if you do reach a vote and it turned out that you do reject the modification, you want to issue a denial, maybe appoint a member, have the chair be appointed by the board to sign off on a denial decision, which would then get filed. Because you have a very tight deadline under the remand order to file a written decision with the town clerk following the conclusion of the hearing.
right, which was 14 days, right?
14 days, correct. And I doubt you have another meeting in time.
Okay.
So if you want to go ahead, so a couple of options. Keep the hearing open, as long as we're within the deadline for keeping the hearing
But
open.
we're coming up, that's gonna close rapidly.
Or you could go ahead, close the public hearing, take a vote, and, you know, a vote subject to signing off on a denial decision.
So March 2nd. Okay. Sure, it was March 2nd when we opened?
Yeah. George, you know.
Yeah, John, just give me
Okay.
one moment to look at the order. Conclude the hearing and render a decision no later than 60 days of the hearing's opening. So if you have another hearing date within 60 days of when you opened it, which was when?
It was March 2nd, so I know you had spoken to council for the applicant about that continuation. 'Cause
Yeah, you opened the hearing on March 2nd,
Correct.
then it would be
Last meeting. March 2nd.
April, May.
Now.
mean, you could go ahead tonight, close the public hearing, take a vote.
No, I think what you're saying is you want you want adequate time to draft a decision that outlines these concerns and also outlines.
That would be preferable, that then you'd be voting on an actual decision before you. I'm nervous though now because, you know, it's, as usual on this, there's ambiguity to it because it was by agreement that you opened it on March 3rd. What was it, March 3rd?
So we opened on the 2nd. I know
March
it-
2nd.
Yeah.
March, the remand order told you to open the hearing by February 16, unless the parties agree to a later date. The parties did agree to a later date of March 2. Then it provides that you shall conclude the hearing and render a decision no later than 60 days of the hearing's opening. So I suppose with reading that, and I'm reading it, this is plain English, so you don't need a lawyer to interpret it.
I'm reading the same thing.
You opened it by agreement on March 2nd. That would give you April 2nd, May 2nd, roughly, to close the hearing and render a decision. So you might want to consider putting it over for one more hearing session so that a draft denial decision can put before you.
Can we work on, so we can keep it open and have a draft denial decision that incorporates a lot of the things that we had as conditions in the denial decision, not just a flat-out denial.
Yeah, Patrick will redraft the approval decision that was put before you for tonight. He'll revise it to note a potential, denial in accordance with the consensus that I heard tonight. And then you can consider it and vote it at the next hearing.
Okay, at the next hearing, which is scheduled for, Stephen, what's our next hearing date? What's that?
April 6th.
April 6th, okay. Okay. Is everybody okay with that?
April 6th, I'm not available, but you may not need me.
I'll discuss the, obviously the draft, if denial, with the town council before submitting to the board for comment.
Okay.
And then go through that.
Yeah, so that way, if there are any changes at the meeting, we'll still have 14 days after we close the hearing on that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
But I would definitely plan on closing and voting it that night on April 6th.
Okay.
Unless you can do another night that week, but if you want to keep it on for that Wednesday,
No,
I'm triple booked that
No,
night.
I get it, so, but you, basically, George, you'll be doing your hard work beforehand
I will
with
look at,
Patrick.
right, I'll confer with Patrick, and Patrick and I will confer beforehand, so you should be okay.
Yeah. And at that point, we can decide who would actually sign the decision, because it gives us time. Okay. So could I have a motion to continue the hearing until April 6th?
So moved.
Second.
Oh, yeah, yes, go ahead, please identify yourself and,
Tyler Hool, I'm one of the abutters at 20 Victoria. Question, a couple of things here. I know parking's not allowed in this section. Is parking allowed on the existing section of Doopy currently? And will that change if this project goes through?
so, I mean, when you say parking.
So like, sorry, yeah, good question. On-street parking.
On-street parking, yeah. Yeah, it's
So
a
that-
public, that's a public way, and we're not, the zoning board didn't have any conditions about that, so.
Well, I was gonna say, and then this is from the decision back in May of last year, so I think one of the conditions was to prohibit on-street parking for the site. I can go through our.
But what?
Prohibit on-street parking. Prohibit.
Prohibit, right.
Yeah.
Right, but that's for the site. Are you talking about the existing part of Dupy Street.
Yeah, so my question is, does that condition apply to the entire
I would
street
say,
or just the site?
I would say no, because we
Okay.
were only talking about the site.
So then my question is, with regards to ingress and egress of the fire apparatus, how does on-street parking impact that? If
Adversely.
someone was to park on that street?
Adversely.
That would suck, huh?
What's that?
That would stink, huh? I don't know that that'd been brought up, so,
I mean, I'm gonna just note for one last time,
Yeah.
in light of the fact that it's 3-2 again, so I apologize for saying this, but let's be very clear. The denial on the remand, all bets are off for any condition that you've imposed. The Housing Appeals Committee will essentially be the town's permitting authority. If they're arbitrary and capricious, it'll be appealable to Superior Court, but it's very hard to overturn a state agency decision. So just be clear on the risk that's involved in the denial. I just want to be clear about that.
I think everybody, at least, I'm comfortable, I understand the risk, we put a lot of work into this, and,
Yeah.
you know, we have what we consider the best that you might get from the town of, from the zoning board, that's the best we can do, but for me, it's not good enough.
yeah, and that's, kind of my point, right? Like if, as it seems you guys are leaning in favor of denying the project, right, that's a safety issue right there. I'm also curious, I know the homeowners association would be responsible for snow removal on the street. What about, like personal snow removal, so driveway and shovels, walkways, whatever? Is that the homeowner, or is that?
In the event of a denial,
They're all-
it's all gonna be litigated at the Housing Appeals.
Sure, sure,
Committee. The Housing Appeals Committee is gonna impose any conditions or not that they see fit.
But they should have
So there's no
every
point.
piece of
Yeah.
evidence why it wouldn't, I understand that part.
That's such small potatoes for what we're looking at.
So, I'll get to the point. My point is, if the homeowners have to, that means they probably need, and not just snow removal, but also maintenance of what little patch of grass they may have. That means they probably need a snow blower and or a lawnmower. With the little area that they have, they're not having sheds, so they're gonna put those into their garage, their two-car garage. Now they have one less spot, 25% less parking on site, which means potentially more parking that would, if they can't park on site, on street, on site, they could then park on street in Dupy, which means there's more likelihood of cars being there, and so the safety issue.
But doesn't HAC, do they look at the reasons for why you denied it? Like, they look at the safety reasons for why you denied it?
I can't speak for the HHC.
I think that's what he's kind of getting at, is to like. look at the
Like, do they look at it? That's
If you
right.
wanna-
And if
you
they
wanna
do
be
look
in-
at, I want
Town
to make
council
sure
tell
that they
you,
have
yeah.
If you
all
wanna
the
be a witness
information.
in the Housing Appeals Committee proceedings, provide your information to Patrick. You can shoot me an email, and we'll be happy to present your
Okay.
testimony.
Totally separate. We had chatted about potential tree removal because all those pine trees are like whatever, 120 feet tall. And we had talked a little bit with Mr. Petrosi about removing those, but I didn't know if that was in writing anywhere. I'm still concerned that, I don't know, because.
It's in our decision, but
Okay, I didn't see it there, so I just want to make sure that it was. I
Let me
didn't see it.
finish.
Sorry.
It's in our decision, but if we deny it, that whole decision can go out the window.
Yep, understood. Okay, thank you.
I think I just want to add, like, you know, I think we have to consider the fact that it likely will go out the window. And the fact that there's a 1 foot potential for going across the center line, if we deny on that basis and it goes to the Housing Appeals Court, they could approve the original project, and now we're gonna have a 4 foot overhang or more. And to me, I hear your point, Mr. Chairman, about being responsible board members, but in my view, the likelihood is that we will lose. We have nothing in this record to support a denial on the basis of the modified plan, in my opinion. And when it comes back and the town is faced with a 12-unit project with a 4-foot overhang, in my view, the board has not done its job because it has not considered the very likely outcome here. I just wanted to put that on the record because I think many of the points that you're making have to do with conditions that that were part of the hard work of the board and in response to comments received by the neighbors for requesting a lower density and screening and all that kind of thing. All that's off the table if we choose to deny, and that's part of my reasoning for, wanting to approve the modification. But I just wanted to say that.
Can I just say one thing? I'll be quick.
Come to the microphone.
I will, I just wanna make sure I come up. I don't think it should have got that far.
Just identify yourself for the record.
Michael Molliver, I live at 3 Doobie Street, I abut the project. When the perk test started, all that, I could have told you where the water was coming from. It's in my basement, there's a lot of water there. That being said, thank you for coming out, Mr. Delaney, for looking at the actual Doobie Street, how wide it is, moving that pole, all that. I don't believe it should have even been thought about on Doobie Street. It's not wide enough. You'll have to take my property, the Murphy property, Janice's property, Kristen's property, just to make it wide enough for cars to go up, to put a sidewalk once you get into all the talking about sidewalks and meetings. Off of Summit, when the neighbors in Summit were against it earlier on in the other meetings, they were against Doobie Street being a throughway and having cars doing the cut through, the speeding, all that. I know you have no control over that. That's up to police and the neighborhood, the safety of it. But on Summit, the way it looks like set up, if you go from a bird's eye view, the town owns two, if I understand it correctly, owns 2 parcels. You can come off of Summit with a cul-de-sac, and I know we can't stop building. I don't want to stop anyone from working, building. It's their property. I know there's rules, like there's rules on my property, everyone else's property. But back on Doobie Street where we live, it's tiny. My truck barely fits down it. We got to go back. I don't know how much wider you can make it. You'd have to take our property from doing it. But off of Summit, to come off and do the cul-de-sac that way, I'll have to deal with the water and the reservoir, whatever that is. I understand it happens. I didn't buy the property sight unseen. The idea, though, I think it should have got to the point where the applicant could come in, Wall Street Builders can come in off of Summit, if the town can work with him to come off there and build a cul-de-sac. It'll mirror Victoria, and then you can get into all the other stuff. But just to come in and hand it over to the HJC or whatever, the state, I seen what the state can do. They never been down Doobie Street to say it would be safe. They didn't come down and look at it. They won't. You've driven on state roads. I mean, I don't know if anyone works for the state or whatever, but they're not the best. I don't think they're qualified. Whoever said it's safe should be reprimanded or fired in that sense, because I don't care if they've been doing it for 30 years. It's not, the project should have been off a Summit, cul-de-sac, and that's be about the safest way. Then you can move forward with buildings, taxpayers, the whole thing, and then snow removal. And then it would mirror the area. It fits it. The area does not fit buildings to come off Doobie Street would not, where are you gonna walk? That's the whole thing. I don't wanna get into it and keep going, but it's on and on and on. I think it should have been off of Summit. I don't even know if that was presented before and how it got to Doobie Street.
It wasn't presented because the applicant doesn't own that property.
The town does.
The town does, but that's.
But there's 2 parcels. I'm just saying the water's there's already a hydrant there. Doobie Street's owned by people. How much you can't, the street is not wide enough.
We went through this in the whole hearing process.
We've been through it. I don't wanna waste your time with it, but that's the big picture. If the state, if you deny, which thank you if you're gonna do it, but I don't wanna keep him from doing his work. This is the idea, I know should have come off of Summit. It would have been a much better project. And then you wouldn't run into all this issue with High Plain Street and another cut through. Ask people who live on Carriage Lane, on Baker, how fast people drive. They'll tell you. So thank you for your time.
Okay. So, anybody else on that? Okay. So, we'll continue it as I was the motion was made and seconded, and this will give time to draft a decision. Okay, all those in favor of continuing, and this should be the 5 voting members on this, continuing until 7 o'clock at Town Hall on, what's the date?
April 6th.
April 6th. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, so carried. Okay. Very good. Next on our agenda, we still have one item, and that is
Yep, that's it.
It had to do with the bylaws. And just-
Oh, yeah.
We have a bylaw review committee that the town has put together. Is anybody interested? All the boards were asked to have somebody participate in that. Anybody interested in it? Judy? You interested in that?
I thought they,
Look at Dave. Dave. Yes, I would be delighted to be on that.
Okay. I think it's the general bylaws. It's not specifically zoning bylaws.
No,
It's
it's the
the
general.
general bylaws. And I know you've taken a look at things, so, on that, so.
And I have.
I know you have. So-
Deeply.
Right, that's why I think
You don't wanna
it's-
know.
I think
most
that would be
qualified.
helpful, so.
Thank you. I will do
Okay,
that.
I don't think we even need a vote for that. Judy volunteered to be on the bylaw review committee.
We didn't even talk. It looks like we talked. We did not talk.
That was a setup.
It was a
the
second.
memo that I saw anyway said that the committee actually consists of a resident from each of the precincts, and that they would come to the boards and stuff, or comment, I don't know, maybe I'm looking at something different.
What I got was, that they just wanted a representative from the
From each
different
board,
boards.
okay.
But they also did, it is set up by the town meeting, but they wanted somebody from the boards.
Okay.
So, you are correct on, every precinct has
That's one.
at least one, yeah, one.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
You should thank me.
Do we have the minutes from March 2nd?
Yeah, I think it's just the
We'll go for a drink afterwards.
provisions from the last review.
I wouldn't make it home if I did. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any corrections to the minutes, but I have a suggestion. I know at one point you said, we've spent hours and hours on these hearings. Can we start to insert, like, the time we started Doobie Street and that we ended, the motion, just to, it doesn't have to be like
Okay, so just,
an exact, but
So-
an estimate, just to keep track
Just-
of
okay.
hearing time.
Here, okay. Can you add that from now on, just?
Yeah, I'll go off the recording and,
Yeah,
yeah.
we
Yeah, of course,
started,
yeah.
I think it's, I know other boards have done that, and I don't see any problem with
Yeah,
that.
I mean, just, when you say you did a 40B and you spent hours,
Yeah, no, this actually documents.
documents
Yeah.
the hours. The volunteers are spending.
Yeah, just the hook.
Being paid, aren't we?
Okay.
The time they said an hour should be being paid.
Did anybody have any comments? First, do you have the minutes?
Yeah,
Okay. Did you have any
I don't
comments?
know.
Okay. Did you review them?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, good. Okay, they must be good.
I would've told you.
I know, Bob's very good at the minutes. Okay, could I have a motion to?
John, I haven't read these. I haven't even gone over these. Not that it matters, but I haven't even gone over them.
Okay.
I did have one question, and it was, on, I guess it's page 2. The town council updated litigation, but
Yep.
there's no detail. Is that not important? Can it be just brief or not?
That was to give the board an update.
It's not, it was out in the open. It wasn't an executive.
No, it wasn't,
litigation.
right, but,
So we don't, I don't wanna lose track of what he talked about. I guess is all in the minutes. I don't have it, so I guess you'll have to
be added in.
Sure.
add those in too.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
brief comments
Okay.
on
the pending litigation cases.
Whatever.
School Street project.
Could I have a motion to approve the minutes of March 2nd?
So moved.
Moved by Dave, second by Bob. All those, any further discussion? with the modification of adding in the update from town council. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, so carried. Okay. And upcoming meetings, so we'll be seeing everybody on the 6th, April 6th.
Motion to
Okay.
close?
Could I, somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Jane,
Second.
second by Dave. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.